Vinland Saga is a story about growth, redemption, and the price of finding peace in a world torn by war. Thorfinn was just a kid when he watched his father get murdered. For years, he killed in cold blood chasing revenge. But then, he gave up the sword and said, "I have no enemies." This is the complete story of how a child soldier became the king of peace, from killing for revenge to building a land without war. Thorfinn's journey is the most transformative, philosophical, and soul-crushing in all of anime. And with Vinland Saga finally ending, we're breaking down his entire life that led to his final message to the world: a true warrior doesn't need a sword. In the year 1002, we meet Thorfinn, a child from Iceland living with his sickly mother, older sister, and father Thors. Thors was a kind man who helped out in the village, and one day he took in an escaped slave who was dying from the cold. He went above and beyond for this stranger, even offering to sell his sheep to the slave owner Halfdan. Thorfinn witnesses one more good deed, as his father imparted the story of Vinland to the dying slave. Thorfinn would hear stories from famous explorer Leif Erikson, who told him about a mysterious land of abundance called Vinland, an unknown world filled with what Iceland lacked. So with wonder in his eyes, young Thorfinn dreamed of adventure to escape his quiet village life and sail towards the legendary land of Vinland. But everything changed when a band of elite warriors, the Vikings, arrived with a truth that shattered his world. Thorfinn's father Thors wasn't just any man, he was a living legend, once known as the Troll of Yom, the fiercest warrior of their clan. He chose peace and exile in Iceland to escape the endless cycle of bloodshed. However, his past finally caught up to him when King Svein Forkbeard, ruler of Denmark, declared war against England, citing the murder of his sister and other nobles as justification. But this was no mere retaliation. Svein saw it as the perfect pretext to expand his empire across Europe. And to wage such a campaign, he needed the might of the Vikings, a brutal order of elite warriors feared across the north. But one of the greatest legends was missing: Thors, who in 966 had abandoned the battlefield after faking his death. After the birth of his daughter, Thors started to develop feelings for his family and cast aside his appetite for violence. And sadly, desertion from the Vikings is a crime punishable by death. So 16 years later, coming to the present, to correct this betrayal, Floki, a high-ranking officer, was sent to Iceland under the guise of recruiting Thors. Thors knew he couldn't refuse without risking his family and entire village, so reluctantly he agreed to fight one last time. So hoping to avoid suspicion and protect those he loved, Thors gathered a small group of the strongest men in the village. However, this news of Thors' insane aura, learning that his dad was a legend, it made Thorfinn excited, which in turn fueled his own desire to become a warrior, to the point of even stealing his dad's dagger. This saddened his father, who after years of battle knew there wasn't any true glory to be found. However, knowing the eagerness in his son's eyes, Thors decided to pass down his own blade, along with some parting words: "You must have no enemies," a lesson Thors adopted after many years of war. However, as he left his son to look after their family, Thorfinn would immediately ignore everything. Yep, he just snuck in and stowed away on his dad's boat to join the war. Little did he know, his father had other plans from the very beginning, especially after finding Thorfinn. You see, knowing that the men from his village were too novice to fight in actual combat, Thors had already decided to drop them off at a remote island and instead go alone. However, before Thors would enact his big brain plan to save his friends and son from experiencing the carnage of war, they were met with a huge surprise. In truth, it was all a ruse. Unknown to everyone, Floki hired one of the most ruthless men alive, Askeladd, to do the bitter deed of killing the Troll of Yom. You see, Deep down, he hated Thors. Thors wasn't just stronger than him, he was better in every way. Whilst Floki clawed his way through bloodshed and politics to gain power, Thors was born a prodigy. But what really enraged Floki wasn't Thor's strength, it was that he threw it all away. Thors abandoned the battlefield. He rejected the warrior code, choosing peace over conquest, and disappeared to live quietly in Iceland. Even worse, Thor's name still carried weight in his army and in the land. Even in exile, men whispered about Thors with awe and reverence. So Floki wanted to erase him, not for justice or duty, but to destroy the legacy of a man he could never surpass. Now, askeladd was a mercenary bandit who, among other things, hated Christians and Danish. Basically, he was like your average Viking, but he knew immediately what he was getting into and only chose to go along with Floki's plan out of curiosity to meet the most famous warrior on Earth. And so, Thor's crew would find themselves trapped like rats to be attacked by askeladd. However, he immediately showed everyone why he was the strongest by taking down 28 of his men like it was light work. Except no one actually died. Out of his mercy and ideals to save his people, Thors then challenged askeladd to a duel, which Thors won. Pointing his sword at him, Thors tells the mercenary to leave. But in this duel, askeladd acknowledged Thor's might and honor, even asking him to be their leader before claiming that it was a joke. Sadly, Thor's one-sided beatdown quickly shifted as one of askeladd's men, Bjorn, took Thorfinn as hostage. Thors calls out askeladd for cheating, but knowing the Viking only wants his life, Thors throws away his blade, saying that a true warrior needs no sword. After declaring Thors the winner of their match, askeladd ordered his archers to kill him. Askeladd respected this dude more than any man. His admiration for Thors changed him forever, as this moment of selflessness stuck with him throughout the remainder of his journey. Askeladd, who lived by manipulation and violence, he was stunned by this ideology. He had built his entire life on lies and strategy, and here stood a man above it all, stronger, kinder, and freer. Even as Thors died, askeladd was shaken. Similarly, losing his father destroyed Thorfinn's innocence. He felt extreme guilt that it was his mistake that led to his father's death. If he stayed at home and just listened, Thors would be alive. So to Thorfinn, askeladd stole his father's dignity and swore revenge. His new life of violence had begun. Thorfinn was stuck in living hell, becoming the very opposite of what his father desired.
You don't have enemies. One who's a great warrior doesn't need a sword.
At just 6 years old, Thorfinn followed askeladd's mercenary band, looking for any chance to kill him. Thorfinn would initially be starved, he stalked the group from a distance, and scavenged for anything left behind. But he had to mature real fast, learning to hunt, practicing his swordsmanship, and living independently. But askeladd monitored everything and was secretly impressed, especially after Thorfinn stopped midway before assassinating him in his sleep. We then learn Thorfinn did not want to win the same cowardice way askeladd did. Thorfinn wanted to win fair and square in a duel, like his father was supposed to. So taking advantage of Thorfinn's determination, askeladd kept the boy around as part of his team, joining their expeditions to plunder and kill, with the promise that if he performed well and got stronger, he would grant the boy his request of a duel. Askeladd basically used Thorfinn's rage as a tool, shaping him through mentorship and pain, like a trial by fire. Askeladd barely shows fatherly warmth, but in his own twisted way, he gave Thorfinn purpose and discipline. And over time, askeladd sees glimpses of Thor's in Thorfinn, which haunts him as he witnesses Thor's son degrade into a soulless killer under his command, especially shortly after Thorfinn crosses the point of no return, where 6 years later, in the year 1008, Thorfinn would reach a humble English village. Being dirty and unwashed, seemingly lost, he was taken in by a caring elderly woman and her daughter. Even as their unexpected guests for a few days, Thorfinn would grow to care for this family, their kindness reminding him of a home he would never come back to. A mother's voice, a warm meal in his belly, the scent of safety. But in reality, Thorfinn was sent here for a dark purpose, and that was to send a signal for the Vikings to attack and plunder the village. Torn between a new home and his revenge, Thorfinn chose revenge and watched as the Vikings killed everything in sight, including the motherly woman who almost brought back his humanity. And this is just one of Thorfinn's many sins that would later haunt him in his nightmares. 4 years later, in 1012, Thorfinn and Askeladd's mercenaries raided a fortified castle in France. But instead of a typical siege, Askeladd pulled off one of the craziest stunts in the manga. He dragged their Viking longbow across land using logs and brute force, launching a surprise attack from the rear and overwhelming the defenders. But most importantly, Thorfinn's skill was on full display as he managed an insane feat at such a young age, killing a commander on his own, which won him a promise of a battle with Askeladd. However, sadly, it wasn't even close. Askeladd toyed with him like a grown man roughhousing with a child. He disarmed Thorfinn effortlessly with one hand and then popped his shoulder out of place, ending the fight in an instant. The duel he spent years chasing was over in seconds. But with the raid being a success and the mercenaries drinking and laughing over their blood-soaked victory, Thorfinn sat alone sorrowing over his loss. He refused to celebrate, and to him there was no joy in killing, no meaning in victory. It's here that Thorfinn meets Hardened, a noble woman turned slave, forced to serve Askeladd's uncle. She's another person worn down by a world built on chains and swords. Thorfinn tells her that if he was in her position, he would kill her master and escape. Hardened responds with a heartbreaking question. Do you think there's a land across the sea where there's no war, no slaves? And for a brief moment, Thorfinn pauses. He has no answer yet, but the idea lingers in the air like the whisper of a dream. The idea of Vinland, a land untouched by the cycle of violence he's been drowning in. A place where people like her, and maybe even people like him, could finally be free. He brushes it off at the time, too consumed by revenge to believe in such things. And a year later, in the year 1013, Thorfinn would now officially join Denmark's war against England. The Danish Viking fleet pushes inland through the river Humber. The invasion stalls at London, where the Vikings encounter unexpected resistance, not from English nobility, but from one of their very own, Thorkel the Tall, a legendary Viking warrior that has defected to the English side, simply because he finds them more fun to fight. Thorkel's name alone struck fear into armies, formerly one of the young Vikings' greatest commanders. He earned his reputation through sheer brute strength, wielding dual axes and charging into battle with a big old smile. Thorkel is either a nephew or distant relative of the young Viking chief, making him a distant uncle or cousin to Thorfinn by lineage. He holds the bridge against Sweyn's forces, laughing through volleys of arrows and charges like it's a bloody game. To break the stalemate, Askeladd sends his best weapon, Thorfinn. The boy, now a hardened killer, challenges the big brute in a high-stakes duel on the battlefield. The size difference is absurd. Thorkel is a giant with the force of a catapult, and Thorfinn, he's fast, precise, and lethal, but one mistake means instant death. Thorkel is impressed with his skills at such a young age and tells his men not to interfere. Thorfinn aims for the wrists, and his opponent unarmed gets excited at the challenge. Thorfinn then realizes realizes a giant can't fight well below, dodging his kick and goes for the kill. But Thorkel catches his blade with ease and slams him into the ground, throwing Thorfinn like a ragdoll into the wall of barrels. The others retreat, but Thorfinn, bleeding and not backing down, states his name. And that's when Thorkel's eyes light up, interested in this kid more and more as he lets him escape. 3 months after the siege of London, in a small farming village near Bath, askeladd would stumble upon a different gold mine altogether, finding the lost Danish prince Canute. This plan would change the course of history forever. You see, Prince Canute was the second son of King Sweyn Folkbeard, ruler of Denmark. During Denmark's invasion of England, Canute was sent to the front lines as a political pawn, not as a warrior, but he was to act as a figurehead to unite Danish forces and legitimize their conquests. But here's the truth, King Sweyn didn't want Canute to survive. He favored his oldest son Harold and saw Canute as weak and unworthy of the throne. He sent Canute to a brutal war zone without proper protection, and that wasn't just poor planning, it was a death sentence disguised as duty. King Sweyn hoped that either the English would kill Canute or rival Danish factions would, so he wouldn't have to deal with succession disputes, right? However, after killing a royal messenger, askeladd decides to save Canute and use him as a tool for his own goal. To do this, askeladd would have to face Thorkel and his men of 500, who had Canute in their captivity, a challenge which felt was worth the reward. Thorkel captured Canute for leverage, profit, and more importantly, a worthy fight. He hopes Canute's capture will draw powerful enemies to him, like Thor's once was, and keep the war exciting. So knowing Thorkel holds the prince after the London ambush, askeladd sets a clever trap. His men burn part of the forest near the river Sven to stage a diversion against both Thorkel's force and Ragnar's escort. Amid the chaos and smoke, Thorfinn, soaked in water to protect him from the flames, is sent into the blaze to reach Canute. He slashes through soldiers, reaching the prince and gets him back into askeladd's lines, where essentially Thorkel meets Thorfinn again and explains to him how he knows his father. Thorkel tells them they are heading to the same place, so if they can escape to safety with their plan to get Canute, they would technically win this duel. Now with Prince Canute, askeladd orchestrates a secret crossing into eastern Wales, his mother's homeland. There, he leverages his ancestry to broker a non-aggression pact between Canute and the Welsh, buying time and protection. A month later, deep in the earldom of Mercia, central England, askeladd's band is starving and they're desperate. Supplies have run dry, morale is low, and the brutal winter offers no mercy. So in a ruthless move, askeladd orders a raid on a quiet English village, slaughtering nearly everyone to steal their food and erase any trace of their presence. Only one child survives, a young girl named Anne, left standing in snow where her silence is more haunting than screams. The cycle of violence is continued. This child is just what Thorfinn was in the past. She becomes a ghost of their sins, a symbol of the innocent lives crushed beneath the weight of war. But back in Gainsborough, Floki reports Prince Canute's disappearance to King Sweyn, but the king, cold and calculating, refuses to act, delaying any rescue until spring, and even hinting that Canute's loss may be very convenient for him. Soon, word of the massacre reaches the countryside. Anne is found, and with her, Thorkel learns exactly where askeladd is hiding. So the hunt is now on. But who is Canute? Well, as a person, he's timid by the violence of politics and war. He was Thorfinn's foil in every way, but somehow they become friends. With Thorfinn's rash bluntness and being rude, even calling Canute a princess, it allows Canute to come out of his royal shell. Ragnar's death is the moment that shatters Canute's innocence and forces him to confront the brutal reality of the world. Askeladd seeing Ragnar as a crutch preventing Canute from becoming a true leader, orders his quiet assassination. When Canute learns of his loss, something inside him snaps. He understands that peace won't come through kindness, but through power. After confronting existential questions raised by priest Willibald about innocence and original sin, only an impartial, unconditional love like nature or God's love can truly be pure. Human love, like Ragnar's for Canute, is ultimately discriminatory because it places one individual above all others. Guilt eats at Canute, where he realizes 62 innocent villagers died to keep him safe. He decides he will claim the crown and reshape the world, even if he must become a demon to do it. Now, as another month passes, in the harsh new year of 1014, Thorkel finally catches up to Askeladd's dwindling forces upstream along the river Severn. Facing certain death, Askeladd's men, they betray him, almost killing him. They also refuse to fight Thorkel's army. Only Bjorn and Thorfinn stand by him. Our MC, he actually rages out that these stupid grunts almost kill Askeladd, taking away the one thing he yearns for all these years. The rest of Askeladd's men are then cut down like meat on a butcher's table. A total bloodbath under Thorkel's orders. But he doesn't care about the weak. He's only there for Thorfinn and askeladd. Thorfinn steps up to face the giant once again, but this time not just for pride, but for survival. But this maniac? Bro, he literally punches a horse and knocks it out cold with one blow. The duel then begins, and the entire army stops to watch in awe. But Thorfinn, he swears that this fight won't end like last time. He darts in with speed and precision, managing to draw blood from Thorkel, something almost no one alive has done. The troops watching are losing their minds, whilst Thorkel grins like a kid at a festival because he has a new challenge. Thorkel then commends Thorfinn for his guts and states that he's just like his father Thor's, revealing only a little information he knows about him, teasing the boy to keep entertaining him if he wants to know everything. Thorfinn then aura farms in front of everyone that it's going to be tough for his opponent to talk after he's beaten him into a pulp. Now no one takes him seriously and everyone starts bursting into laughter like crazy, but Thorkel kills one of his own men, telling them to all stop laughing and it's not funny. In fact, he respects Thorfinn so much that he calls him a true warrior. The fight then continues, with Thorkel admitting that he doesn't even have 5 men in his army that could match Thorfinn's strength. He then asks a very deep philosophical question. What does it mean to be a warrior? Thorfinn is immediately reminded of his father, with his words ringing in his ears. A true warrior needs no sword. But at this point, Thorfinn doesn't want to acknowledge it, brushing it aside to charge in with rage. He keeps cutting Thorkel, but they're too shallow, and then he gets outmaneuvered with a gust of snow, resulting in a kick that throws him so high into the air that he lands outside the area, crashing into trees. However, Thorfinn doesn't give up. He's actually buying as much time as he can for Askeladd, even with one hand. And in a memory of the Battle of Maldon, Askeladd figures out a moment where Thorkel the Invincible actually came down. He waits for the right opportunity and shines the sun in his eyes to blind him, where Thorfinn gains momentum by knocking Thorkel out and taking out his eye. So with his pride on the line, Thorkel orders them all to stand down in a fit as they were about to kill our MC. He's raging out and he's about to kill his own men for disrespecting him. But in the end, with Canute's interference stating that using him as a hostage is a useless endeavor since, yeah, he has no value, Thorkel then admits he lost the duel to preserve his dignity. He is impressed by Canute's transformation, even testing the prince's resolve by almost killing him where he doesn't flinch. In fact, he has the same eyes as Thor's, where Thorkel then swears loyalty and joins their march to Gainsborough where King Sweyn awaits. Now around this time, askeladd starts revealing his true goals. He sees Canute as a pawn to shift the balance of power and protect his mother's homeland, Wales. For most of the story, he played the role of the cold, pragmatic mercenary willing to lie, cheat, and kill to get ahead. But underneath the smirks and schemes was a man carrying a secret burden. A burden that's not so different from Thorfinn, because just like him, askeladd was born between two worlds. His father, a brutal Viking, and his mother, a poor enslaved woman from Wales, the land he held sacred. To the Vikings, she was nothing, but to askeladd, she was the only person who ever showed him kindness. And as she is wasted away, broken by sickness and slavery, she whispered stories of a hero who would one day rise and save their homeland. Askeladd took that to heart. He became that hero by manipulating the monsters around him. That's why he saw Canute not as a ruler, but as a weapon, a pawn he could place on the throne so that Wales would be safe under the rule of a king he controlled. So just like Thorfinn chased revenge for the sake of his father, askeladd chased power to protect his mother. They were two sides of the same broken coin, both victims of a cruel, ugly world, both shaped by love they could never reclaim. But where Thorfinn was still blinded by hatred, askeladd was already walking the path of sacrifice, a man who had already accepted he would never find peace. He even kills his one and only friend Bjorn, told Canute the truth that he killed Ragnar, and pretty much made every calculation for the sake of building a world where Wales is protected. Eventually, askeladd, Canute, Thorkel, and Thorfinn then arrive at Gainsborough alongside Leif Erikson and Maltz. They meet the king and all the politics unfolds with everyone playing their Game of Thrones. Before things move forward though, Thorfinn earns yet another chance to duel askeladd, something he's been chasing for over a decade by now. But askeladd tosses his sword aside and then taunts the kid, mocking the fact that he still hasn't figured out why he keeps losing. Askeladd beats him down again, but this time there's more behind the punches. It becomes clear that askeladd is doing more than humiliating Thorfinn in this duel. He's trying to teach the dude not just how to win a fight, but how to survive in a cruel, manipulative world. He tells Thorfinn that he's too easy to read, that he gives away everything with his rage. Askeladd is forcing him to confront the truth. Blind emotion will always lead to failure, and here's where their connection becomes even more undeniable. Earlier, Thorfinn witnessed askeladd lose control for the first time when King Sweyn called him a bastard slave. That raw aura of rage was something Thorfinn had never seen from askeladd before, because usually he hides it, he controls it. That's the very lesson askeladd is trying to beat into Thorfinn. Askeladd reveals that he killed his own father through calculated vengeance, and now he's trying to teach Thorfinn not how to fight, but how to weaponize emotions without being ruled by it. In his own brutal way, askeladd is trying to turn Thorfinn into something more than just a tool for revenge. He's trying to wake him up. Even Canute states that with askeladd's wisdom, this guy, askeladd, bro, you're worthy of being king. After the duel, they finally meet King Sweyn at the royal court, where everything comes to fruition. Askeladd would finally be able to protect Wales with Canute's powers, and eventually have influence over the royal court. However, what no one expected was that King Sweyn saw through everything and made an outrageous call to invade Wales. After askeladd pleads to negotiate with the Welsh instead of a full-out war, the king whispers into his ears, revealing that he doesn't care about Wales. In fact, he wants askeladd to kill Canute for him and join his forces so that Harold can become king after his passing, his actual favorite son. Now, if askeladd agrees, he will let Wales go free. But the king also makes a disgusting remark. He calls Wales a useless country, only worthy of producing slaves like his mother. As a result, askeladd rages out and is torn. Protect his homeland or obey the king? Whilst this was happening, Thorfinn waited outside the city. He met Leif Erikson, the man who told him about Vinland, and someone who searched for him for 12 years. But all Thorfinn could think of or talk about is askeladd and his revenge. Thus, he refuses to join the old man. However, caught between treason and surrender, askeladd chooses a third option. He draws his sword on King Sweyn, slicing his head clean off, slaughtering several guards, and publicly declares himself his real name, Lucius Artorius Castus, heir to the Roman Empire and protector of Britannia. Now, this isn't suicide, it's strategy. Canute understands immediately what he has to do to secure his own legitimacy for the throne. He kills askeladd himself, framing it as an act of royal justice. Askeladd then dies with a smirk. His mission is complete, but for Thorfinn, he witnesses a living nightmare. The man he dedicated his life to killing is now gone, not by his hand, but by the prince. Thorfinn then begs for his enemy not to die, not until he enacted his vengeance upon him. But askeladd tells the boy to let it go and follow his father's path instead. Become a true warrior. However, in a fit of grief and rage, Thorfinn attacks Canute, scarring his cheek before being dragged away by guards. The king had to give Thorfinn a pardon of mercy, as everyone wanted to kill him on the spot. As Canute now claims the crown of Denmark, Thorfinn's world collapses, and from here, his actual true journey begins. Now stripped of purpose, with eyes void of anything but despair, Thorfinn lets himself be captured. But ironically, it was in captivity that Thorfinn would begin to rediscover the humanity he lost. He's no longer a warrior, but a silent shell of nothing, sold to a wealthy landowner named Ketil. He didn't speak, he didn't fight, he simply worked the fields, awaiting the cold embrace of death. That's where he meets Einar, another slave, but one with fire still in his heart. Einar had lost everything to war too, but unlike Thorfinn, he hated warriors. So when he learns Thorfinn used to be one, he snaps, trying to kill him in rage. However, what he finds isn't really a fighter. It's actually a broken man, screaming in his sleep, tormented by the ghosts of the people he killed. Every night, Thorfinn was dragged into a dreamlike hell, a pit of bones with faces with no names, voices that cried out, "Why did you kill me?" So for the first time, someone saw Thorfinn not as a warrior, but as a victim of war too. And from that moment on, Einar chose to stand beside Thorfinn as a friend. During this time, it looked like Thorfinn might actually find happiness, but nothing in the world comes easy. Thorfinn is attacked by Fox, for example, who mocks the slaves. And when Thorfinn doesn't flinch whilst he's slashing his body up into bits, giving him multiple scars, that's when Snake arrives. He attacks Thorfinn and he instinctively defends himself. Snake then states to him that he does wish to live despite him saying so, even if he doesn't believe it. This encounter cracks open Thorfinn's denial, planting the seed for his eventual choice of peace. Then, as time passes on, one day, guards working the farm smashed their wheat fields, mocking and humiliating them again, destroying months of effort. Einar's furious and he tries to fight back. Thorfinn does knock out one of the guards with the cleanest punch I've ever seen in anime, but he holds back afterwards, refusing to fall into violence. He goes unconscious, and just like that, the ghosts of Thorfinn's past return, dragging him down into Valhalla. But it wasn't the warrior's paradise he was told about as a child. There were no feasts, no gods, no glory, only a pit filled with the dead, the ones he killed, stacked like corpses beneath a blood-red sky. This was no afterlife, it was actually hell, a reflection of the world shaped by violence and of the man Thorfinn used to be. Standing in that pit was Askeladd, but this time he was a true mentor. He simply forced Thorfinn to look, to see the faces, every soul he cut down without thought, without remorse, every scream that he had supposedly forgotten. Now, just as Thorfinn is going to be dragged into hell with the overwhelming amount of burdens and sins on his shoulders, askeladd gives him a motivational speech to never give up on his ideals and that he doesn't have to become a monster destined for damnation. So in that moment, Thorfinn finally realized what his father meant. I have no enemies. Tears start to fall down his face and Thorfinn claws his way back up, not to become stronger, but to become new. He swore an oath. Never again would he hurt another soul. He would abandon violence. So as the days passed, the two friends found peace in the small things. Thorfinn was growing, learning how to live again. And when Ketil offered them a deal, clear and cultivate a plot of wild forests, and they would earn their freedom this way. They seized it with everything they had. Freedom was an opportunity. It was closer than ever. Years passed and Thorfinn continued to live in peace within Ketil's farm. Whilst working, Thorfinn would listen to Snake reading the Bible to Svarkl. Thorfinn paid particular attention to Jesus' words about loving your enemies. And as they went about their day, an escaped slave one day named Gudrid invaded the farm, intending on taking Hild with him. That is because Gudrid was her husband. However, due to wounds sustained from the escape, Gudrid was easily defeated by Snake and taken prisoner. Thorfinn and Einar attempt to intervene, but Snake gives them a warning not to get in his way. More than his job as the farm's protector, Snake was motivated by revenge since Gudrid killed his fellow guards whilst on the run. Eventually, in Svarkl's home, Hild tells Thorfinn and Einar her story. She lived in a village in Sweden, which happened to have some iron ore, and this made another village envious, leading to a war between the two groups. Gudrid had once left his wife and young son behind to join the other men in battle, but whilst they were away, Vikings raided their village. Their son was killed and Hild was captured, sold into slavery, and eventually that's when she became Ketil's mistress. Hearing her story actually shakes Thorfinn to the core. It reminds him of his vow to never harm another soul and the countless lives he destroyed by war. He then recalls Leif Erikson's tales of Vinland, a distant land untouched by war. And then he also remembers Hordaland, the slave girl who once asked if such a place could truly exist, a land without war and without slaves. And so, for the first time, Thorfinn doesn't just wish for this land, he swears to build it. Vinland would become his atonement. But suddenly, they see Hild bring Gudrid and help her hide him. However, Snake is still in pursuit. They save Gudrid's life and Thorfinn decides to hold Snake off in a battle. He imagines Askeladd's ghost again, this time reminding him that he has chosen violence. But regardless, Thorfinn takes on the challenge, and both men are impressed with each other's skill in combat. In the end, Snake manages to find Gudrid and deal a mortal blow. Hild escapes the farm with her dying husband, but not before she too is caught by Snake's men. Whilst this is all going down, Canute makes preparations to claim Ketil's farm. After all, his youngest son Omar killed one of Canute's officers by accident. Now, in reality, Canute has set this all up as a justification to take Ketil's land to fund his expensive conquest of England as part of his greater plan to build a utopia on Earth. Joined by Floki and his Yom Vikings, Canute sets sail for Ketil's farm. But thanks to Leif Erikson and his adopted son Bargeis, who is a Thorfinn lookalike by the way, they smuggle the family out, and Ketil returns to the farm only to lose his goddamn mind upon hearing that Arnheid tried to escape. While the men, led by Snake, prepare for war, Kettle punishes Arnheid and nearly kills her, if not for Snake's intervention. Leif also manages to reunite with Thorfinn once again, and they work together to bring a beaten Arnheid out of the war zone. However, in spite of their best efforts, it is too late. Arnheid, suffering from Kettle's abuse and the loss of her family, she now wishes for death. What was the point of living life itself if it was only endless suffering? Einar was filled with rage because he's secretly in love with her, and he takes out his anger on Kettle, who had fled after his side clearly lost the battle to Canute. However, Thorfinn stops him and they went to Arnheid. Before she could pass on to the afterlife, Thorfinn tells her the words of Vinland, and after burying her, the two men swear on her grave to build a country of peace together. So now they head off to confront Canute to end the war once and for all.
Alright, don't worry, I got this, because it's here where Thorfinn reaches the answer he was looking for: diplomacy, and decides to immediately enact upon it. Using the power of words, he prepared to convince Canute to give up the farm. In turn, he will build a land where they can truly find peace with no wars or enemies. However, Thorfinn is stopped by Drott, one of Canute's warriors, who refuses to acknowledge that the king is familiar with a raggedy slave, let alone believe he was once the king's god. So to get past, Thorfinn challenges Drott to punch him 100 times, and if he withstands the blows, he would be allowed an audience with the king. Blow after blow, Thorfinn absorbs every punch, having learned from his training with Askeladd on how to last long in a sustained fight. After 32 hits, he finally folds when Snake apprehends, telling him to stop and that they will surrender the farm, because if dialogue could resolve things, he would have done so ages ago. Thorfinn instead responds by asking him, did they really give diplomacy their all? No, they responded, sword with sword. This beatdown was Thorfinn's baptism into a man who truly has no enemies, a man who needs no sword, becoming a true warrior like his father Thor's. So Thorfinn gets back up and spits out his broken teeth, telling Drott to continue. By sunset, after many hours, Thorfinn stood tall. This feat amazes everyone, including Drott, who pleads with Canute's right-hand man Wolf to allow Thorfinn to meet the king. Wolf, impressed, questioned why didn't he just fight Drott to prove his status, to which Thorfinn explains how silly it would be to negotiate peace by beating a man. Thorfinn insists this battle is not really theirs, but Kettle and Canute's, who instead should handle their dispute by playing a game of taffel, i.e. chess, believing that no one has any right to harm another person. Thorfinn tells the Vikings they are not his enemies, because he has no enemies. And so, Thorfinn finally reunites with the former prince, now a king. After apologizing for the scar he inflicted 4 years ago, he thanks Canute for sparing his life for what would usually be a capital punishment. Becoming a slave had allowed Thorfinn to redirect his anger, sense of loss and lack of life into something that gave him a new purpose. Acknowledging the growth they both had, Thorfinn tells Canute to leave the farm, reminding him he too once had stated how one day he would make a worldly paradise, an ideal country for those who live in suffering. Does he not still plan to bring this in fruition? Canute rhetorically responds by demonstrating that though he is emperor, resolute in his campaign to build heaven on earth, his divine power of a king is meager in the face of God. He illustrates this by commanding the waves to stop, except it doesn't, for God alone controls the waves. Canute's dream ain't just a kingdom, it's a rebellion against God himself. To build paradise on earth means flipping the script on heaven, because in Canute's eyes, humanity is already damned. The Vikings, they are proof. They have committed grave sins after abandoning love. And according to Priest Willibald, that means they have lost their ticket to salvation. But Canute doesn't reject them, he embraces them, because sin is human nature, and if the worst of the worst, the monsters cast out by God, can be saved, then anyone can. That's Canute's twisted logic. If paradise won't come from above, then he'll drag it out of the mud with his own two hands. And to do that, the world must be unified. No more nations, no more tribes, no more excuses to hate. One king, one law, one peace. And yes, if it takes violence to end violence, so be it. That's where Kettle's farm comes in. It's not just land, it's the gold mine that funds this holy war. But Thorfinn shows up and says no. So Canute does what he believes is the only way. He pulls out his blade and lays it bare. Either kill me or be killed. He hears the ghost of his father telling him Canute is the shepherd. Everyone else, just sheep. They'll never understand his burden, not even Thorfinn. So just like he poisoned his kind, gentle brother to achieve his goal, he is ready to kill Thorfinn too. But the king's curse, his father's ghost, whispering in his ears, breaks apart with laughter the moment Thorfinn shows another way. Rather than take the last resort of violence, he simply will run away, far from the world Canute is trying to build. Both of them wanting the same dream of building a land of peace have different means. So Thorfinn offers an ultimatum. Whilst the king expands his empire, he will bring all the people who cannot live in Canute's utopia into his own, filling the hole that Canute will make along the way. All Canute has to do is his job and not make Thorfinn's mission any harder, meaning he just needs to stop persecuting people. This is the moment where Canute finally feels free of the burden he's been holding all alone, as now he has another person in Thorfinn to rely on to achieve his paradise. So he accepts the deal, and the battle in Kettle's farm ends as Canute leaves. After saying their goodbyes, Thorfinn and Einar set off with Leif, who makes one thing clear: Thorfinn's dream of building a country in Vinland is impossible without him. Leif is the only one who knows the way, so this mission can only be done together. But before they chase paradise, they head back to Iceland, so Thorfinn can do what he's been avoiding: face his mother. In December, the year 1018, Thorfinn finally reunites with his family. At first, his sister Ylva doesn't recognize him at all and slugs him on the face for acting too familiar. But his mother Helga, seeing the resemblance between him and her late husband Thor's, she knows it's her son the moment she sees him. In the pursuit for revenge for his father, he had lost out in time with his mother, sister, and even her kids. But for the first time in forever, Thorfinn was home. His sister gives him a quick shape up, as he was when he first left. After sharing his story and adventures with his family, Thorfinn begins his real first step towards Vinland. But first, he needs money, like us. Guys, if you appreciate these long-winded videos and you want us to do more, then make sure to support us and fund our channel by checking out our merch on animedrip.shop, where you can get yourself 10% off with the code ABD. Honestly, editing all of this is making us broke. So please give us money. But for reals though, to achieve the dream of making a country in Vinland, Thorfinn too needs sponsorship and funding. So being in Iceland, he turns to one of the richest men there, Halfdan. Yep, the same slave-owning landowner his father once opposed. But this is not before some rowdy misunderstanding, where Thorfinn gets into his first non-violence defensive fight after the farm, against none other than Sigurd, Halfdan's son, who uses chains as a weapon. Yet Thorfinn, with his big brain, high battle IQ, manages to negate all incoming attacks by covering his arm with cloth to catch the chain. Though he still got stabbed through it, Thorfinn showcased he is slowly becoming like his father, who was able to defeat his enemies without bloodshed. Luckily, Halfdan arrives and stops their brawl. They then pitch the idea of Vinland to acquire the funds. Leif explains that more than an island, it's a continent with no end of fertile land. With Thorfinn's and Einar's farming experience, they will be able to cultivate wheat and many other things. However, to Thorfinn's surprise, Halfdan reveals that this loan comes with huge risk, as years ago they did attempt to colonize Vinland, led by Leif's younger brother, but they had failed. The natives they called Squawlings had completely obliterated them, including killing Leif's brother. If it wasn't obvious already, Vinland is the North American continent. This is a story inspired by real-life events, and so Leif rebuttals Halfdan, as this time they have Thorfinn leading the campaign, where before his brother led it with violence. Thorfinn will achieve it with peace. Sadly, Halfdan needs collateral for this loan, which Thorfinn doesn't have. For a moment, he did consider taking Thorfinn's pride as an exchange, asking him to kiss his boots. However, once Thorfinn agreed with excitement, Halfdan stopped him, knowing that this man had relinquished any pride he once had, even making a comparison to his father Thor's. So the deal fell through. But he didn't leave them with nothing. Halfdan parted with an expensive gift of a narwhal's horn, where in Greece they can be sold for their weight in gold. You know, if they sell it as a magical unicorn horn, that is. This was actually a challenge set from Halfdan, as Greece from Iceland is a treacherous journey, and further than even Vinland, in the opposite direction. Just one way would take a year, with no guarantee of survival. So they did, of course, what any normal person would do, and decided to leave for Greece right after Sigurd's wedding. Speaking of, his now wife, mind you, runs off during their consummation after stabbing Sigurd in the leg. Gudrid actually always dreamt of exploring the world. Sadly, due to being a female, she wasn't allowed. But with the crime she committed, Thorfinn invites her to join in their quest. And so, the party gains another member. Sigurd not taking it well. His chaotic chase becomes a recurring side plot in their journey. They make the first stop at Faroe Island Stamoy, near the shores where Thor's had died. It's here Thorfinn thinks back to how his father had still kept his sword around just in case. Thor's understood his presence brought battle, so he was never able to cast away the blade for good. Yet, Thorfinn wanted to do what his father couldn't, abandon the blade altogether. As he doubted he would be able to achieve this, Einar consoles him, reminding Thorfinn of the man he became, convincing even a king to give up conquest. If there was anyone who could truly live life without holding a sword to hand, it had to be Thorfinn. And so, Einar's brotherly supportive relationship cemented him in his goals. But the road to Greece takes a dark turn as they make their next stop to Shetland's Island. There, Thorfinn and the crew comes across a dying woman, a victim of a brutal blood feud between the Angrim and the Gisli clans. Clutched in her arms is a baby boy. His name is Carly. However, when the group tries to find his closest relative to take him in, no one accepts due to the fear of being involved in the blood feud. If news got out that he's alive, to prevent future retaliation, he would be killed alongside those harboring him. Sadly, being born as a Norseman, Carly, when grown up, will have a duty to avenge the death of his mother and family. When Gudrid questions why the world would force a child to live a life of violence when that violence took away everything from him at the start of his life, Thorfinn explains that this is the logic of Norse culture. Violence happens for the sake of peace, and if revenge is not sought, then murder will have no consequence. People will kill with impunity, and more will be harmed if they are not stopped permanently. This is why obligatory revenge exists amongst Norsemen. This way of life has kept their society in check so far. But the idea of killing for the sake of peace is not really peace, bringing Thorfinn once again to seek an answer that would replace Nordic customs and handle crimes more peacefully, where very soon he would come to address. Regardless, along with a dog lost in war with no one to raise them, Thorfinn takes the child, carrying yet another soul into their dream of peace. Eventually, in January, the year 1019, they reach Norway, where a chance encounter leads to a bear attack. Thorfinn tries his non-violence policy, but quickly learns that ain't gonna work and retorts to protecting everyone by going head to head with the beast. Luckily, a mysterious huntress saves them. Her name is Hild, a woman with a scar etched across the right side of her face. She shares the bear as a meal with the group and then drops a bombshell. 8 years ago, her entire village and family were slaughtered by Viking raiders. They were after her father, the village chief Rafinkel. The man leading them was none other than Askeladd. And the one who personally killed her father? You guessed it, Thorfinn. At that moment, he came face to face with the biggest ghost of his past. When he confesses to everything, Hild draws her bow and prepares to end him. However, Einar steps in, willing to sacrifice himself to ensure Thorfinn doesn't get killed, as he is far too important to die. They try to convince Hild that Thorfinn isn't that monster anymore, but she refuses to accept, as she can never dismiss the things he had done and the words he had said. She then reveals that the meal they just ate was poisoned, and if they want to live, Thorfinn must take the antidote in single combat, man to man. Thorfinn accepts and even promises that he will not allow anyone to get hurt, including Hild. And so begins the most symbolic chase yet. The hunted and the hunter, flipped in a twisted echo of everything they have lost. Hild retreats to the woods, setting up crossbows as traps hidden in the snow. Meanwhile, Thorfinn scours for her presence while shouting he will atone for his crimes, but he cannot die just yet. Back on the boat, whilst everyone is debating on whether or not they were really poisoned, Hild didn't seem like a person who would do that. So Einar heads back to help Thorfinn, with the rest of the gang following him. Whilst waiting out for Thorfinn to emerge from the trees, Hild thinks that it's impossible for him to atone for the death of her family. Either he brings them back to life, or his life will be taken in their place. Before her family's death, Hild was a genius engineer, having invented many machinery, helping her father, who oversaw building of longboats in his part of Norway. Hild also invented a powered saw that was moved by water wheels, all to maximize boat production. Sadly, the life that she led vanished in a blink of an eye, as one night during dinner, they were attacked. Her father, being a devout Christian, knowing the end was near for him, told Hild that no matter what, she must forgive her enemies, for that is her only salvation. Moments later, he was swiftly killed by Thorfinn in front of her eyes. Since Hild was not his target, he tells the girl to run away before the rest of Askeladd's men arrive. When asked why this all happened, he responded, "This is a hunt. The strong hunt the weak. It's a fact of life. If she wants to hate on anything, then it should be her own weakness." Though at that time, Thorfinn was just following orders to obtain another battle with Askeladd, these words reflected his own understanding on why his father was killed. Hence the reason he sought strength for revenge, knowing that's the way the world works. However, to Hild, these words were life-changing, as it completely overridden her father's final teachings, as to forgive her enemies and pray for those who persecuted her meant she was always going to be their prey. After falling into a pit, Hild was saved and raised by a kind hunter. However, he was not able to erase the hatred in her heart, especially, after dying in a tragic hunting accident, fighting for his life against a bear. She was angry at the bear that took the old man's life, and at herself for losing more loved ones. And so forever was etched in her heart anger and hatred towards monsters like the bear and Thorfinn. With her insane big brain, she advanced her hunting abilities with technology, literally wiping most of the bears from existence. And now, Hild was finally ready to take revenge on Thorfinn. Injured, taking many bolts and arrows to the leg, Thorfinn looked death straight in the eye and came face to face with Hild, who repeats the same word he once uttered before changing her life. She is the hunter whilst he is the hunted. However, Einar shows up, begging for her not to kill Thorfinn, who mind you is suddenly paralyzed by the ghost of his many victims gnawing at him. Einar tries to convince her that the act of killing a human will stain a person forever, just as it did Thorfinn, who still suffers nightmares from his many victims and never gets any refreshing sleep. Hild, however, refuses to believe that killers like Thorfinn are humans who feel regret. But Einar's word slowly creeps into her as he gives the advice not to become the monster she hates. Gudrid also starts pleading to spare Thorfinn's life as he is different from his past. He is truly a kind person. Plus, he was the first man she saw change a baby's diaper. Speaking of, Carly crying is what actually pushes Hild off the edge. Thorfinn bargains for his life, once again offering to return after he has finished atoning in a few years. But Hild has enough and prepares to kill him right there. However, when she fires her shot, it misses, flying off to the sky. To her surprise, she sees the spirit of her father responsible, moving her arm up, and the spirit of her mentor tapping her on the shoulder. They then tell her to forgive, so she questions Thorfinn on how he intends to atone, where he reveals his intentions to build a country of peace in Vinland to raise more lives than the number he has killed. In a way, this is the answer to the Norse blood vengeance and eye-to-eye culture within their race. If he can do this correctly, then Carly too, once older, might not need to seek vengeance. But Hild refuses to believe that this would change anything, yet she tells him to try it. But as she is the winner of the hunt, his life is hers to claim. She will let Thorfinn keep it for a brief time, watching him from now on, swearing that if he makes even the tiniest mistake and is nothing but talk, then he will be met with a crossbolt to the head. Thorfinn gladly accepts these conditions, thanking her before he faints from the blood loss. When he wakes up after a whole day, he learns from Einar that there was no poison and Hild was only bluffing. Einar scolds him for giving up and for almost betraying their promise on Arnhind's grave by selflessly letting his guilt take over. So they then both reaffirm their promise not to die until they reach Vinland. But for now, they must rest for a couple of months in Norway so Thorfinn's broken leg can heal. 4 months later, in April, the year 1019, they prepare to sail off once again, but not before attempting to leave Carly with another family. However, not being able to withstand his cries, Gudrid runs back to take him in spite of the clear danger this child might face along the way. So now, with Hild on board, their small team only grew. Eventually, they successfully make their way to Jelling, Denmark, Canute's capital city, to practice being traders. Before we forget, whilst Thorfinn tries to avoid meeting old faces from his past, Sigurd, somewhere in the Baltic Sea, had been still chasing after Gudrid and ore farming, fighting a bunch of pirates. Surely Sigurd, the mighty son of Halfdan, took down these lowlives, right? Well, except he actually surrendered immediately and became their slaves. Slaves to be sold in Jelling. And that is where he sees Gudrid again. Although, due to the sheer embarrassment of his situation, he did not want to get her attention, but got it anyways. Being super surprised in seeing him, Gudrid calls for Thorfinn, except hearing this name catches the attention of Thorkell's men who were nearby. Instantly, they wanted to take him to their captain. After some scruffle and the fact that he failed to hide his identity, wishing that his past life could just leave him be, Thorfinn reluctantly accepted to go alone and meet his great uncle, who of course welcomes him by attacking. But Thorfinn, successfully dodging all the strikes, verified his identity and so is happily accepted. Though this time around, seeing no anger in his eyes like he once had, Thorkell points out that his eyes now resembles his father even more. However, it's here for the first time Thorfinn is introduced to none other than Floki. Thorkell introduces Thorfinn as the son of Thors, the troll of Yom, and his niece Helga. Hearing this blast from the past of the man he once orchestrated to be dead blows Floki's mind. After snapping back to reality, Thorkel prompts him to tell Thorfinn about the current succession crisis in the Jom's Vikings. Apparently, the former chief did not name an heir, and to Floki's annoyance, a captain within the band named Wang decided he should be in charge. You see, Floki can't even take this position as the Jom's Viking rules dictate that over the age of 50 they should retire, hence why he wanted his grandson Balder, the son of the previous chief, to rule, but he is too young, being only 10 years of age. So Thorkel thinks of a big brain plan and suggests that his relative Thorfinn, who is also related to a previous chief through his mother Helga, should take charge instead. Since Thorfinn is more than capable with his legendary prowess and status, Thorkel tells him that together they can take over the Jom's Vikings and rule the entire Baltic. But of course, Thorfinn angrily rejects this proposal, wanting nothing to do with it. Instead, leaves with his crew, planning to slip through the Baltic without any incident. Sadly, being involved already, Floki secretly, without the knowledge of Thorkel, orders a hit to eliminate Thorfinn behind the scenes. Like, my guy can't be having a new potential candidate ruling over what he believes is rightfully his. To save his crew, Thorfinn tells them that they should split up whilst he draws away Floki's men and regroup later at a town called Odense in Funen Island. They end up agreeing, but Hild decides to stay with Thorfinn to watch over him. It's here that Gudrid, being separated from Thorfinn for the very first time since their journey, is starting to show affection and worry for him. She even blushes when her desperation to help Thorfinn gets pointed out by Einar, with Leif telling him that the waters that run between man and woman are dark and deep. A foreshadowing to a relationship we will soon come to see. Anyways, as Thorfinn and Hild make it to land, in their mad search, Floki's men attempt to destroy all the fishing boats to prevent further escape. However, the moment an innocent man was about to be killed, Thorfinn finally steps in to take them all on. And get this, with no swords, just hands. To avoid disgrace, the Vikings decide to take him on 1v1. However, even so, my guy with his insane speed, technique, and agility completely obliterates them with his non-lethal combat. Feeling as though they can't win honorably, they decide to all charge him at once. Thorfinn responds by poking the eyes out of one of them and takes them down. Of course, some long-range assistance from Hild. Remember, these guys are Floki's personal Jom Viking squad. Yet Thorfinn, who has been out of true combat for years, destroys them without a weapon. With only 3 of the Jom's Viking left, their group leader commands the remaining 2 to get him. But he is met with a sudden sharp betrayal to the neck. These 2 are actually Wang's men, Askeladd and Reg. For a while, they were spying amongst the ranks of Floki to keep an eye on his underhanded activities. And now, after witnessing Thorfinn's incredible ability, they wish for him to help their leader. This request put my guy over the edge, as he rages out that he wants to be left alone. Thorfinn is done with that life. Why can't they just get that? However, Askeladd points out that as long as he's on the Baltic Sea, he cannot live amongst the common people. He will always be seen as a warrior wolf. This is illustrated right after, as when a young girl offers Thorfinn a necklace for his help, her mother overreacts and pulls her back, begging Thorfinn for forgiveness. Askeladd points out Floki will continue to send his band of assassins and it will only affect the common people. So, to prevent them from being involved, Thorfinn agrees to leave the island with Wang's men, taking him to their camp. There, Thorfinn meets Wang, who revered his father as the incomparable Thors, and finally reveals that Floki was the man responsible for his death. Not only that, for years Floki had been assassinating their group's leaders for his own ambition to climb the ladder. This news completely shakes Thorfinn to his core. After all these years, he regained his unquenchable rage and for a moment was possessed by the desire to kill Floki. Yet, by feeling these emotions, he fell into despair, realizing that he was still the same man that killed so many people. Hild, right behind him, tells Thorfinn if he is going to avenge his father, then so will she. Thorfinn accepts that he does not have the right to enact vengeance, otherwise he will be a hypocrite. However, while sitting on a rock facing the shore of an unforgiving North Sea, Thorfinn comes to the realization he still hasn't truly changed, as the uncontrollable rage inside him boils on, frightened that the moment he lays his eyes on Floki, he will kill him. Thorfinn wonders when will he be reborn into something else, expressing his deepest wish to be a better, kinder and stronger person. He starts by requesting Atli, the last remaining member of Askeladd's band, to be released after Wang is done with him. Currently, my guy is a prisoner to prove Floki's crime of killing Thors and was caught stealing. Wang agrees but states that a thief will always be a thief. However, his hypocrisy is pointed out by Hild, as his merry group of Vikings steal land from the common people all the time. In fact, as they spoke, his men were raping the common girls they captured as slaves. In finding this out, Hild violently reacts against them, but before Wang could respond to her outburst, the news of Thorkel the Tall's fleet arriving at their camp comes to light. You see, my guy Thorkel is just built different. Having love for war and the desire to fight strong warriors like Wang, he was persuaded by Floki to join his battle. Of course not knowing that the guy, murdered his friend Thors and ordered a hit on Thorfinn. Speaking of failing in doing so, Floki now also sends Garm, his best warrior, to take care of him. But in all of this chaos, Thorfinn takes the opportunity to knock out a couple of guards and helps Hild save the slave girls so they can all escape together. But in the middle of their getaway, they are apprehended by none other than Garm, who managed to single-handedly kill one. He presents the rebel general's head and brags about this kill. But whilst Garm is yapping, Thorfinn legs it. But it's here we learn Garm isn't any ordinary warrior. He is a complete beast. In a blink of an eye, he catches up to Thorfinn and forces a battle, meeting him excited Garm as if he gained a new friend. His weapon of choice was a spear, whose reach surprised Thorfinn as it scratched his left cheek. As it turns out, Garm was able to extend the spear's range by letting it slide down his palm at high speed and holds its butt to maximize its reach. Garm was no doubt a prodigy, but seeing Thorfinn with no weapon in hand dodge his attack made him see that this man was also the real deal. However, even still, Thorfinn was no match. Garm then offers him a blade to fight properly, but Thorfinn refuses and decides to take a better option: to run! Now obviously Garm knew he could catch up again, but realized Thorfinn will just keep running away and not fight seriously, so he decides to just stay and think of a way to motivate him. Now, if you guys haven't noticed, he is pretty much like Thorkel, only looking to fight the strongest. Speaking of which, Thorkel finds out that one was assassinated and goes on a rampage. This was supposed to be his battle, and now his hunger is unsatiated. He respected his former comrade one and so gave him a Viking send-off, burning his body in Sigurd's ship. Yep, somehow this doofus also ended up joining Thorkel's men for battle. But it's here where Thorkel completely flipped the script. His original goal was to take on General One, but once he got killed by Garm, Thorkel decided to turn against Floki, all to satisfy his bloodlust. We also learned that Canute had ordered Thorkel to settle the dispute within the Jomsviking before things turned ugly, and had sent his trusted sidekick Wolf to oversee things. But King Sama secretly hoped that the Jomsviking would wipe themselves out after killing their pack leader. Regardless, after rallying Wang's men, Thorkel added them to his numbers, and they all set sail in a massive fleet for Jomsburg to kill Floki. Come on guys, at this point, we all need to accept that Thorkel is the biggest troll, not Thors. Also, I know there's a running joke that Thorkel is just a battle-hungry doofus, but we soon come to learn that isn't really the case. Because as they sail to Jomsburg, he confronts Wolf, on why King Canute had really sent him. In nearly every case, Thorkel is ordered to stand down and is stopped from having a good war. But now, for some reason, he suggests that Thorkel should interfere in the squabbles within the Vikings. And the fact that this whole inner conflict started after the random death of the Jomsviking chief seems odd, especially since a lot of high and mighty guys are dying of some random illness. So obviously, knowing that Canute is behind this, he chokes Wolf and questions him if snapping his neck is also part of their brilliant plan. He then declares that he is no puppet, and if Canute wants someone dead, he should kill them himself. Thorkel doesn't give a toss about Canute's plan. Rather, he will fight when he wants and die how he wants. With that in mind, he sends Wolf to be dropped back in Yelling so he can have his war as he likes it, the Viking way. Now at this point, it's been a week since Einar and the others have been waiting for Thorfinn, and since he said he will regroup within 4 days, it starts to concern them, but their situation goes from bad to dog poo-poo real quick as Garm finally big brains his dilemma on how to get Thorfinn to fight. Of course, using his over 9,000 IQ, he figured that Odense is the only place in Funen where outsiders can stay for a long period. So finding Thorfinn's friend was just a matter of time. Garm takes them as hostages but leaves Bug-Eye behind to send a message. Thorfinn must join the coming battle of on the side of the attacking forces, i.e. Thorkel's, and most importantly, he must bring his own weapons. Bug-Eye tries to hold Garm off, but even underhandedly, he of course fails, knocked out, waking up to see Carly and their dog all alone. Ironically, after returning to Jomsburg from his fun Thorfinn chase, Garm did not get the welcome he expected for triggering the war with Thorkel and hoping he could be a reasonable exchange to stop the incoming attack. Floki had sent him to the Gulag. There he meets Thorfinn's crew again, the very hostages he took to lure him. Here, Gudrid shows her disapproval of Garm's reasoning for all of his actions so far, in which being the love for violence and battle. But to him, life otherwise is extremely boring. In fact, states all the warriors in Jomsburg will think the same. Meanwhile, Thorfinn finally reunites with Bug-Eyes, and whilst he wishes to rescue the others, he's afraid of losing control and killing someone. Confused by Thorfinn's moral dilemma, Bug-Eyes begs him to save his adopted father, Leif, feeling indebted for giving him a home. So Thorfinn agrees and swears to save them. With all of the pieces now coming together, the Battle of the Jomsviking is here. Thorkel forces, which are 1,000 strong, now converges on Jomsburg for the war. In Thorkel's camp, Sigurd acquires a chain and, showing off his skills, impresses Thorkel enough to join him by his side. Now, without a ship, my guy feels the need to prove himself so he can win glory in battle and earn a new one to continue the chase for his wife. But most importantly, with Thorkel now in Jomsburg, Floki sends his envoy along with an imprisoned Garm to be used as a bargaining chip. However, Thorkel immediately shuts down all negotiations. He is here to fight, to fill his appetite. Garm, face to face with this legend, having killed Wang, who was the same generation as Thorkel, starts talking smack, underestimating him, leading to Thorkel meant to give him a beatdown. Thorkel then tells them to stop and accepts Garm's challenge. And boy, is this fight insane! This leaves them both with severe injuries, but they have the best time of their lives. Garm finally recognizes Thorkel as the greatest warrior in the world, whilst Thorkel finally finds an opponent who has given him the time of his life. Thorkel's right-hand man, Asger, even remarks that the two are so similar, it makes you think that Garm could be one of Thorkel's bastard. But with that, Asger declares a draw, saying that if they keep fighting, they will both be too injured and die before even enjoying the war. So Garm heads back to prepare for his fight against Thorfinn. Speaking of, throughout all of this, his friends manage to escape with the help of Balder, the soft-spoken grandson of Floki. Yep, the same boy Floki had been prepping, plotting, and killing for, paving the path of of his kingship. You see, Balder is nothing like his granddaddy. He doesn't care for power, war, or thrones. He just wants to live a quiet, peaceful life fishing. What's even more sad is that Thorfinn is his cousin, both being the grandson of the legendary Sigvaldi, the third chief of the Jomsviking and the older brother to Thorkel. However, my boy Balder thinks Thorfinn is the one leading the attacking army, and so he pleads to his friends to tell him to stop, even willing to convince his own grandfather to give up the control of the Jomsviking. Einar and the others clarify that Thorfinn is not behind this, but will still pass on Balder's intentions to who is. However, as Einar and Leif successfully manage to escape through a secret Jomsburg well, Gudrid and Balder get caught by one of Floki's men. Luckily, Gudrid had somehow pulled off posing as Balder's maid, but they both were confined into his quarters because the siege had begun, with Thorkel's side using catapults and battering rams to break through the fort's defenses. In turn, Floki's side shot arrows through giant logs and even set it on fire, all to deter Thorkel's ascension. This battle is tragic on both sides, where brothers who once knew each other are now enemies, killing one another. And in all of this madness, Einar and Leif try to escape, but sadly the latter gets injured, luckily to be saved by none other than Sigurd. Yep, these guys just keep running into each other. Now Thorfinn, who just arrives, finally reunites with them back in Thorkel's camp, who, mind you, managed to recover from the burns, even getting an afro out of it. Everyone gangs up on Thorfinn, wanting one thing or another, but after Sigurd brings up Gudrid's imprisonment, Thorfinn promises to fix everything. First, they attempt to stop the war by negotiating with Thorkel, saying that unlike Floki, Balder is willing to cede power and give up control. Thorkel, of course, refuses. My guy wants war and wants to win. So with Hild, Thorfinn decides to go through the secret well so he can rescue Gudrid on their own. In fact, they successfully infiltrate the fortress, and with the help of Balder's maid Nanna, Thorfinn, after knocking out some gods, is finally reunited with Gudrid. Unbeknownst to them, Sigurd was sent to follow Thorfinn by Asgerd to find the hidden passage and open the gates from inside, where after causing some ruckus, he burns one of the houses as a signal for Thorkel's army. Things get even more crazy because Garm, who was refused entrance back into the fortress, decides to scale it with his insane parkour. However, Garm wasn't the only one aura farming. No. Thorfinn coming to Gudrid's rescue made her knees weak, forcing her to blush uncontrollably. Fellas, she is in love. Thorfinn here, meeting his cousin for the first time, tells Balder that he isn't behind this war and everyone is fighting for the sake of nothing. Thinking how ridiculous the situation they're in, they all just burst into laughter. Suddenly, the atmosphere completely flips as Floki bursts into the scene, which triggers Thorfinn's suppressed rage. The man responsible for his father's death and pretty much everything he went through was right in front of his eyes. Without a moment to spare, he knocks out and takes the blade from Floki's bozo gods. Thorfinn cuts this dice head's fingers off and prepares to kill him. Gudrid, seeing the man she loves filled with so much rage, is confused until Hild explains why Thorfinn is like this, whilst also aiming her crossbow to fulfill her promise. If he kills Floki, she will kill him. However, before Thorfinn can deliver a finishing blow, Balder jumps in to protect his granddaddy, stating he should die instead. Balder blames himself for everything, since he sees Floki as a caring grandfather who only wanted to secure his grandson's bright future. This kid always knew what Floki was doing, but never had the courage to stop him. Seeing his 10-year-old cousin pleading to spare the person he loves reminded Thorfinn of how much pain he has caused others. He was just about to repeat the terrible sin he committed against Hild and all his other innocent victims. His pursuit for vengeance had made him akin to the very culprit that took his father away. Seeing his hypocrisy, Thorfinn breaks the sword in hand, finally metamorphing into a true warrior with no enemies. They tie up Floki and the guards, and Baldur then leads them to escape, but Sigurd, causing a fire, had exposed the hidden exit well. With it being blocked, there was nowhere to go. Baldur then comes up with a big brain idea and suggests that Thorfinn should pretend to take him hostage so they can leave through the gates. Filled with guilt, Baldur wants to escape as well because he represents his grandfather's ambition, the cause of this war. Like Hordaland and Einheid, like every victim of war, this poor boy wants to go somewhere, not here. Before they enact their hostage plan, however, Sigurd bumps into them whilst being chased. Floki himself is freed and confronts the gang, so Baldur tells Thorfinn to make the kidnapping more convincing by leaving a small cut on his cheek. This works and Floki immediately orders them to be let out, although he is playing a ruse to buy time for his archers to take out Thorfinn. But before his plans can play out, Garm enters the scene, ready to fight. In fear of Baldur's safety, Floki warns the rogue not to agitate Thorfinn, but Garm does not care and just wants his battle. It's here we see the new and evolved Thorfinn as he skillfully maneuvers his way out of the combat zone, forcing Garm away from his friends onto a nearby roof. Meanwhile, Sigurd and his friend Fatih successfully opened the gates, where unbeknownst to Floki's army, Thorkel and Asker were waiting for this very moment to launch their final charge. Sigurd stays at the gate to hold Floki off whilst keeping Baldur in his grasp, hoping to earn glory in battle. However, Gudrid slaps him up, urging him to live, even promising to go back home with him if it means he survives. Before he can respond, Hild knocks him out and takes Baldur hostage, intending to see how Thorfinn will fight without killing, whilst also allowing Gudrid and Sigurd to escape. Despite her efforts though, Hild is forced to return Baldur to Floki, failing to help the boy run far away as he had intended. Meanwhile, Thorkel is in his element, swinging a massive log and slaughtering everyone around him, declaring his love for war. Likewise, we come to Garm, back at the rooftop where he continues his fight with Thorfinn, who holds him down with just a blade. Garm calls for a timeout, realizing Thorfinn isn't trying to kill him, and reminds him that this is supposed to be a fight to the death. Thorfinn calls him insane for wanting to fight and die for nothing. But Garm argues that no one in this war needs a reason. There is no meaning to their lives and death. Hence why risking it all like it's a game makes it fun. So Thorfinn should play too. Unexpectedly, Thorfinn agrees, saying, you know what, I'll play too and enjoy it. But unlike Garm, he will show him how to play this game as an expert in God mode. Thorfinn will protect his own life without taking the life of his opponent, all without a weapon. So channeling his father, he throws away his knife, realizing that all his hand-to-hand combat and survival skills he learned from Askeladd had allowed him to become a true warrior all along. Although Askeladd was his hated enemy, it seems that he really did become the father that saved him from the path of empty vengeance. And so, Thorfinn wins the fight using Askeladd's very same move. His words had riled Garm up, making it easy to grab his arms, and with a single headbutt, Thorfinn knocks him out. After throwing away Garm's spear, the battle is over. Likewise, with Thorkel now inside, Floki abandons his fort and the men dying to protect it. This cold sacrifice shocks everyone, even his own grandson. But Floki shrugs it off, saying they can rebuild and fight another day. However, before he can enact his escape plan, Thorkel emerges, making a Shining reference. There's Floki! Anyone would pretty much shit their pants at this scene. But it's here that Floki is forced to unleash his trump card, a massive, hairy brute named Ymir, towering even over Thorkel. As the two giants clash, Floki slips away, only for Baldur, the boy he claims to be doing all this for, to run away, also he can delete himself from existence. hands. He does this by pointing a knife to his chest. Sickened by the fact that lives are being thrown away in his name, Balder breaks down, unable to go through with it. He drops the knife, falls to his knees, and just cries. He's soon found by Thorkild's men, who also captures Floki, finally bringing this chapter and war to an end. Morning breaks and two weary soldiers share bread as the sun rises. Yet Thorkild is still locked in a brawl with Ymir. Eventually, he overpowers the giant and, grinning like a madman, decides to keep him as a pet for future fights whenever boredom strikes. Asgerd tries to snap him back to reality, reminding him they need to end the war properly with a public execution of Balder and Floki. But with his bloodlust satisfied, Thorkild shrugs. He's not the leader, and that ain't his job. In fact, it's actually Thorfinn's, where after his battle he reunites and immediately hugs Gudrid, relieved to see that she is alright. Once again, her face lights up redder than a tomato, but there is no time for a proper reunion, as Thorfinn has officially been declared as the new chieftain of the Joms Vikings. Does he refuse? No! In fact, before a cheering crowd from both sides of the war, Thorfinn goes up on stage to take his rightful place as chief of the strongest warriors of the North Sea. Balder and Floki stand bound, their fate in Thorfinn's hand. However, Thorfinn does something unexpected. Using his new authority, instead of killing them, he orders their exile, sending them off with a boat and some couple of silver coins to go along with it. This is exactly what Balder had dreamed of. But his next order is what truly took everyone by surprise, which was to completely disband the Joms Vikings forever. The crowd and warriors erupt in outrage, thinking he has lost his mind. But with Thorkild's backing, who had been given charge and decree over all these matters by King Canute himself, made this order become law. Knowing that some of these people could not give up the warrior life, Thorfinn had ordered them, if they wished to fight, to join Canute's cause, whilst the others to go back to their families and finally retire. Thorkild then takes Thorfinn to the spot where he and the Joms Viking buried his father Thor's. Here, Thorfinn reflects on his journey, his father's words, and how hard it is to have no enemies. Einar tries to console him, reminding that's why they are heading to Vinland, away from all of this endless fighting, to build a nation of peace. After hearing this for the first time, Thorkild warns Thorfinn that no matter where he goes, war will exist, even in Vinland. But before Thorfinn can argue, Thorkild demands payment for his help in the form of a duel. Just as Thorfinn is ready to show off his god mode warrior skills, where he'll end fights without taking lives, Gudrid bashes into Thorkild, telling him to stop. That's enough! Thorfinn just tried to live an honest, true life. He's trying his hardest to be a gentle person. Why does everyone keep preventing him from doing that? Why can't they just leave him alone? At that point, being the lady killer himself, Thorkild realized that this young lady is in love with Thorfinn. Right there and then, Gudrid finally confesses. Yep, she is in love. And she's even willing to fight Thorkild in his place. Recognizing her feelings are true, Thorkild leaves them alone and parts, telling Thorfinn that he better marry this girl. But still, even being a proud great uncle, seeing his great nephew find a strong, capable woman for himself, the next time they meet, Thorfinn will have to uphold his promise to a duel. Now Sigurd, who overheard everything, finds himself in a dilemma. His runaway bride is in love with another man, but instead of raging, Sigurd surprises everyone. As later, when Gudrid prepares to leave with him back to Iceland, he tells her to confess directly to Thorfinn, asking how he feels, and if he accepts her feelings, she won't have to return to Iceland with him. This journey had changed Sigurd. Without even waiting for Thorfinn's answer, he left Gudrid behind and sailed home alone. Sadly, Gudrid's confession doesn't get us the answer we all hoped for, as Thorfinn doesn't reciprocate her feelings. Yeah, bro said no, not because he doesn't love her, but because he doesn't deserve love due to his past sins as a warrior with countless blood on his hands. But Gudrid doesn't care about his past, and all she wanted to know is if he liked her back. Well, we don't get the answer. Well, not yet. Because following this, we fast forward to June of the year 1021, 2 years since the Baltic War. Panic sweeps through Iceland. A fleet is approaching, just like when Floki brought the Jomsviking 20 years ago. The men rush to arm themselves, ready for war, until a voice calls out, introducing himself as Thorfinn. Now, 25 years old, he's returned, with Gudrid by his side. In the 2 years since we last saw him, Thorfinn has been busy, building a massive fleet, just like the real-life Thorfinn who sailed to North America with one of the largest expeditions in history. He formally introduces his family to his sister Ylva, revealing that he married Gudrid during their travels and adopted Karli as their son. So yeah, obviously he did like her after all and bagged the girl. Alongside Gudrid, Einar, Hild and Leif, with his own adopted son Bugeye, spent those years across Europe, even reaching Constantinople, gathering wealth and manpower to secure a comfortable life. But Einar makes it clear, all those riches and men are for building a country of peace in Vinland, and now they are here to recruit pioneers to join them. Ylva interrupts their welcoming and lets them know that Thorfinn technically did steal Gudrid from Halfdan's estate. You know, considering he did feast a wedding banquet and married her off to his son. So Leif suggests they should go and apologize and officially inform him that Gudrid is now Thorfinn's wife. When they do, Halfdan starts off harsh, displeased to see a woman cry in front of him out of fear. Yep, he's actually a good guy. In fact, when he is told that the married couple have not had a wedding feast, Halfdan declares that he will host one with the money that Thorfinn brought him. And so they celebrate. This is a major moment for Thorfinn. He was given a chance to really enjoy happiness that he always thought he was undeserving of. Another step towards accepting himself. When the feast ends, Halfdan meets Thorfinn and Gudrid and relays how his son Sigurd had told him to give his full support to Project Vinland. With everything now coming together and Thorfinn having his happy family, my guy's still getting nightmares. Yes, he's having guilt. The dead is still weighing on him, telling him that he doesn't deserve this bliss. This is not just the voice of the victims he never really got to know. It's his own voice, doubting if he can truly live a happy life. And that's why Thorfinn has to keep moving forwards, keep redeeming himself and complete Project Vinland to give others a new way of life. However, Leif lays out the voyage plan, that Vinland would take roughly 6 weeks, give or take, to reach from Iceland, and they will dock on the cabin he left behind. Thorfinn decides they will leave by the next spring in the year 1022. But because Bugeye decides to sit this journey out, the gang realizes the importance of obtaining new recruits. So he holds the thing, basically the ultimate village meetup. In this great gathering, Thorfinn reveals his Project Vinland to everyone. Those who feel persecuted, suffer from enslavement, feel exhausted by the cycle of violence, and just want to run away. Well, look no further. Project Vinland is for you. After offering a land overflowing with forest, wildlife, and zero fighting, free from slavery, Thorfinn invites anyone who wants to join. But there is one rule: no swords. Any weapons made just for the purpose of killing should be left behind. Only then they can join to build the chillest, most peaceful country in history. This is the sort of place for people like Halvor, who found himself in Thorfinn's house later that night, trying to hide from Halfdan, his slave owner. Obviously, Thorfinn, now rich due to his time as a trader, planned to buy any slave their freedom if they had wished to join, Halvor being no exception. His story is actually pretty insane because he is the hidden son of Thorkel, making him Thorfinn's first cousin once removed. Technically an uncle or an aunt. Yep, this man was raised as a woman. You see, being Thorkel's progeny, he wanted to make his child a warrior to join him into battle. But to protect his child, his mother pretended their son was a girl, naming him Cordelia. This backfired because Thorkel many years later returned to marry his so-called daughter off to a strong man, all to bear a son to join him into battle. This forced Cordelia and her mother mom to run away, got shipwrecked into Iceland instead being separated. Halfdan, seeing the size of the man, took him as a slave, but being brought up as a girl and seen as a man by everyone including Halfdan literally made Cordelia's life unbearable, where she cannot live comfortably, hence seeking a new life in Vinland. However, for Cordelia's freedom, Halfdan demands 80 sheep, an impossible figure. Thorfinn, using his 2 years worth of business acumen, counters by offering a whole farm in Vinland where Cordelia can manage and grow in Halfdan's place, hence proposing a system from his own time as a slave with kettles, where a slave can earn freedom by building a farm. Cordelia can do the same. Now everyone seems excited to build a better life outside cold, barren Iceland, and their leader is a man with a lot of experience as a trader who has seen so much of the known world. What could go wrong? Well, we are introduced to 3 new faces: Ganglati, Strike, and his older brother Ivar. Of all the Icelanders, Ivar was the most opposed to Thorfinn's pacifism, believing him to be a weak, naive man who knew nothing of war. When meeting with Thorfinn, Ivar argues that they need weapons to confront an unknown group like the tribes in Vinland, since they do not know anything about them, not even their language. With weapons, they can achieve a balance of power, which in turn can guarantee equal trade and thus keep their side safe from war. To achieve peace, Ivar says an army is needed, but Ivar's conversation did not make Thorfinn budge one bit. Thorfinn had told the village that he wanted to ban all swords, but not necessarily all bladed tools. Unlike spears and axes, swords were designed to exclusively kill other human beings, and thus they were a temptation to incite more violence. This was the magic of the sword, something Thorfinn knew firsthand as the boy who took his father's dagger. Everyone can carry axes, knives, and even spears for chopping wood, hunting, and fishing, but otherwise, no swords. This actually upset Hild, who was overhearing everything, and then told Thorfinn not to use the phrase magic of the sword as an excuse for his past sins, giving him another warning. Yep, even after 2 whole years, she was keeping an eye out for him to see if he is a man of his words and can redeem his past sins by making the Vinland project a success. Later, Thorfinn has a meeting with Halfdan, and they talk about Ivar's perspective, along with how disagreements between people requires a means to resolve things, bringing Halfdan to Iceland's own laws and tradition of the Thing, an assembly of people where everyone agrees on decisions and laws. This is why Halfdan, nor any random person, can commit murder. It has to first go through this process. However, whilst the Thing and its rulings can be respected, by itself, it has no real power without an army to enforce it. In all honesty, even in our day and age, with technology at its peak, nearly every nation requires some sort of police. And to keep themselves safe, they need weapons. Likewise, countries who rule over others are those who invest in military and defense. They not only have a say on those nations, but also become protected by outside nations. For instance, a nuclear power may never need to use the weapon, but just by having it, it works as a deterrent. Which is why Halfdan advises Thorfinn that having control over violence is better than not having a means for it at all. This conversation lights up an idea, with Thorfinn proposing an alternative. He remembers that Halfdan cannot kill him because of the law they have, but when he was first questioned why he couldn't, Thorfinn thought about the business agreement they had. He realized that if 2 persons kill each other, they both lose out on what the other person can provide. Each man, or rather each village or country, has different resources. Applying basic supply-demand economic theory, Thorfinn suggests creating an economy of mutual dependence by exchanging goods, not just products, but also knowledge and technology. Each side can improve the other. Thorfinn's big brain actually impresses Halfdan, who tells him to become his son-in-law and heir, inheriting everything he owns and repurposing it for Project Vinland. But the only condition was to stay in Iceland and manage everything from home, which is something Thorfinn is not willing to do. My guy really wants to live out his paradise, okay? Luckily, before he can reject such a huge offer, which would then be called out as disrespect, Sigurd returns with his wife and their firstborn son. Halfdan is so pleased to see his grandson, believing him to be a genius after hearing the boy speak at only 8 months of age. Without even thinking twice about his offer to Thorfinn, Halfdan instantly named his infant as his successor, inheriting all his properties. Yeah, my guy completely skipped over his son. Remember, he brought shame to the family. Speaking of, Sigurd, who literally has a glow up, has a friendly chat with Thorfinn, encouraging him to continue Project Vinland, finally bringing us to spring, the day they set sail. With 5 ships, everyone recruited gathers around, including Ivar and his brothers, who sneakily manages to hide weapons to take along. Yep, this is a recipe for disaster, isn't it? But who would have guessed? As planned, they first land in Greenland, where Thorfinn visits Leif, who's now too old, frail, and let's not forget, has a leg injury to join the expedition. Here we find out that Bogeyes had let the riches they earned get to his head, and he stayed behind in Norway to gamble and get married. Leif doesn't really mind though, and is happy that the next generation can live on. This is symbolized with him passing Thorfinn his old smoking pipe we see in the very first episode of the series, which Leif had gotten from the local people of Vinland. He tells Thorfinn when his Nichmach calls him to smoke, then he must do it, as it is very important to them, explaining that the word means friend in the Mi'kmaq or the Elnu tribe. After reminiscing the long journey that led Thorfinn to this point, Leif remarks on how much he has grown, and Thors would be proud. As Leif sends him off, he tells the boy, "Follow your heart, my son." At this moment, Thorfinn acknowledges Leif as his third father, with Thors and Askeladd standing alongside him. After all, as Yukimara says at the end of this chapter, those who raise a young man can be called father. This man was the true GOAT of the series. He searched for years looking for Thorfinn, and even when rejected, he didn't give up and gave him the whole idea of Vinland to begin with. There would be no Vinland Saga without the OG explorer himself, the Leif Erikson. Before they can set sail, some ruffians arrive, bringing a captured Bogeye, who accumulated a staggering amount of debt, swindled from gambling, scammed by his girl. Thorfinn then pays off a remaining £2 worth of gold, and so Bogeyes rejoins them in their journey. The voyage to Vinland is treacherous, filled with terrifying sights underneath the sea. They first dock on land between Hululand and Markland, where when they reach the latter, they notice it's a place filled with trees. Einar encourages the crew to keep going south rather than settle for less in a land without wide plains. However, since some are not convinced, Thorfinn decides to split the crew into 2 groups, one staying in Markland and Thorfinn and Einar's group heading straight for Vinland. Thorfinn points out an important advantage for creating a second base. If something happens to the main group, like a disease, they will not be completely wiped out. 20% of the crew will provide a supply line in Markland, whilst 80% head for Vinland. Hild sees Thorfinn's way of thinking as a warrior fighting a war, but one without enemies. After a long journey, they finally landed in the cabin Leif had built when he first came to Vinland. As everyone cheers, however, Thorfinn finds an arrow made of stone, which means these arrows belong to the natives who once fought against Leif's brother. There is still conflict and war, so Thorfinn tells his crew to keep going south to somewhere not here. No matter what it takes, he will avoid war at any cost, since he knows more than anyone the pain it causes. But Ivar is so annoyed that they still have to keep sailing. Thorfinn then explains that there are a few requirements for a land suited for cultivation, Number 1. A bay where ships can dock safely. A sandy beach would be nice too. Number 2. Fresh water, preferably a river. Number 3. A forest for building material. Number 4. Plains for sheep grazing and farm fields. And it so happens that their next stop has all those requirements. Einar checks the soil, which happens to be red soil that is good for farming. Again, their time as slave farmers is coming in clutch. And Thorfinn knows exactly what he needed to get started in Vinland. He wasn't just going in blind. The sunlight also happened to be perfect, unlike in Greenland or Iceland. The quick fact here is that this spot is the modern day Prince Edward Island in Canada. Ivor is excited to get going, but Thorfinn says there is a fifth requirement. The land does not belong to anybody. Something that Christopher Columbus should have took note of. Anyways, Ivor suggests splitting the men up to find any bonfires or evidence of people living in the area. He knows the best person for this job, the biggest one amongst them, Cordelia, who, mind you, actually agrees in participating. But it doesn't even take that long for them to meet the natives. Because whilst Thorfinn and Hild ride off together to scout, talking about how they really don't know anything about these natives, plus Leif did not have a long-term relationship with them. Hild, with her triple S rank hunter skills, senses people nearby who are hiding and have already discovered the Norse pair first. So Thorfinn gets off his horse and leaves a bag of wheat, dried pork, woolen clothes, goat's milk, silver coins and a knife as a way for the natives to get to know the Norse newcomers, with all of these gifts being a gesture of peace. Yep, my boy is optimistic that since the natives did not attack first, considering, they did trespass their territory and all, means that there is potential for them to form a good relationship. So they, along with the Nordic settlers, prepare to build the village, cutting down trees to construct their homes. It's here where rumors about Thorfinn is finally spread. Specifically by Bug Eyes, who told everyone about his former warrior glory and how he then became a slave, only to then recently becoming a merchant. Einar also finds a rock, the perfect spot, to set up their goddess, so that she can watch over the country they built. She was carved in Greece and looks exactly like Einhind. Well, not exactly, but they think so. But because of this altar, the people around eventually start calling this settlement Arnheid Village. This is a really sweet moment for Einar and Thorfinn. They did say they'd take her to Vinland, and now she can actually be there in spirit, which will always inspire them to keep moving forwards. Of the 5 boats under Thorfinn's command, 1 was left in Marland. 3 were used to move supplies and people between Greenland and Vinland, leaving only 1 boat with the settlement. With this, they confirm they are in fact on an island, which pushes Ivor to suggest they need to hurry and build more ships so they can have an advantage against the natives. Thorfinn, who does intend to have more ships built, but not for this reason, tells Ivor that the natives are not their enemies. This leads to another philosophical bout regarding the love for war, which Ivor believes every normal man does. Thorfinn then gives the story of Canute, a boy who hated war yet participated in it, even till this day. These men are the most dangerous of all, and they should pray that there are none like that on this island. With every passing day, Arnheid village grows and their farm expands. This of course requires trees, which they cut down, and whilst doing so, the native people continue watching, annoyed by this action, yet fascinated by their antics, along with the display of their insane strength, especially Cordelia being seen as their strongest warrior. After receiving gifts that Thorfinn left for them, the native tribe are put in a predicament. They know the Norsemen are trying to be friendly, but their shaman Miss Wekapuj has seen Leif's expedition long ago and warns them of the danger of making fields, as he was horrified by the death of so many trees. And so, the Ilnu tribe make their appearance in Einheid village. Things look tense, and Ivar brings out the sword he stowed away, with Cordelia catching him in the act, already foreshadowing Ivar's hasty nature that could be the undoing of the entire journey. As it turns out, the natives came here to give the Norse their own gifts, such as their handmade clothing, some good old honey amongst other things. Thorfinn slowly even catches on to the Ill-New language through just reading their body movements, meeting Plimk or PLMK, I can't pronounce this guy's name, but they say they'll be good friends, which we all know is true. Everything starts well with Thorfinn and the Ill-New helping each other out, trading knowledge and materials just like he once told Halfdan. I mean, Thorfinn isn't stupid, he needs to know the lay of the land from the actual natives. Just fighting them would be a moronic decision, even if he didn't choose to never kill again. Their relationship is actually very sweet, with the Ill-New tribe teaching Nordic people on how to play the cultural game, such as Junki. 3 months passed in Vinland very quickly, and as fall comes, so did the resupply from Greenland, preparing them for the long winter. Observing from a distance is the shaman, who hears the plight of Niskawajij, a young native girl with the gift of foresight. After hearing her dreams of walking in nothing but a barren land, with no trees or animals in sight, the shaman takes it as a warning, telling her to meet up with the Nords and learn if they could be the ones responsible for this danger. Meanwhile, he will go and perform a balls deep prediction ritual to decipher the future. And boy, what he sees later is absolutely terrifying and gosh damn accurate. But here, Thorfinn runs into his first problem, finally holding the thing to resolve it. You see, everyone starts trying to claim land for themselves. Never having any himself, he doesn't understand. Remember, Thorfinn was on the battlefield when he was a child and then lived as a slave. He has no idea when it comes to the pride of men. This selfless, intelligent development comes to bite him here. In fact, Thorfinn even promised Halfdan a piece of the settlement in exchange for Cordelia's freedom, and has yet to allocate any lot. But that's a nothing problem when you consider that Ivar is still holding onto a sword, and Cordelia, knowing this, feels guilty in hiding its secret. Ivar and his brother manipulated her, saying this is all to help Thorfinn. These guys are so stupid that they say that Thorfinn is small, so he's weak, and that's why he hates battles. Like, come on, are they serious? They should have watched this montage. Sadly, they missed out, and so did Cordelia, who falls for this stupidity. Luckily, there doesn't seem to be any imminent danger just yet, as the Nords and the natives are getting along, with even Niskawajij befriending Thorfinn and Bug-Eyes, despite her horrific dream.
Now fast forwarding to the winter, Hild began hunting again for the gang, but it's been a long time since she last hunted, admitting that she's a bit rusty since pretty much everything became domesticated. Hild had become not only a very respected and educated member of the crew, she'd even become a teacher for the children in Arnheid's village, teaching them to write and how to do artwork. The difference here is striking to when we first meet Hild. Remember that she joined Thorfinn to kill him, just like how Thorfinn did the same with Askeladd. But there is a big difference between the two. Askeladd purposely manipulated Thorfinn for his own goal, dragging him along with the promise of giving him the chance to kill him. Thorfinn's reasoning for letting Hild join him on his journey was to prove that he's changed. He couldn't die before he completely atoned for all the death he'd caused. Thorfinn was completely fine with dying, but it had to be after his goals were achieved. Hild agreed to this, which is something a young Thorfinn never would have done. If he had the chance to kill Askeladd in a 1v1 combat, he'd take it every time, meaning that deep down, Hild was a very kind person at heart. Hild's hatred eventually for Thorfinn died down over time. She started to get the closure that Thorfinn never was able to. She even became a member type figure for his son Carly. If not for her, they would have been in a rough spot since she's the only one who really knows how to hunt and craft machinery. She gained so much love and warmth, something she thought was lost after losing her two father figures. Now, during one lecture, Carly asked why she hated his daddy Thorfinn. The kid learned this from Bug Eyes, who assured the boy that time he was all wounds. And so, Carly asks if it was time yet to forgive him. Hild isn't nearly as filled with rage when discussing Thorfinn, and through her hunt, we really see how much she's grown. But whilst hunting, she tracks down a bear and found out that it was hibernating. Wanting to be cautious, she waits for the bear out even as night comes. Hild is surprised by the calm of the forest and even thinks about bringing Carly to hunt here. This is the first time in a long while she's really had time to herself, to think with a clear head. So when she falls asleep, she dreams of being visited by a bear spirit, a god of the forest. This deity asks her, "You of the sea, why did you not kill the bear?" Remember that Hild's mentor was killed by it. It would be reasonable for her to lose control and hunt this creature down, but her response reveals a lot. She explains that the bear did nothing wrong. In fact, they were the ones trespassing and causing it to go hungry. The bear had tried to catch fish, but the woman scared it off. But despite its hunger, it never attacked anyone. The spirit said how she once hated bears. One took away her mentor after all, but then we see that they aren't talking about bears at all. When the spirit states you once hated bears, yet you are able to understand the bear in this situation basically represents Thorfinn. Obviously, Hild never hated bears. Come on, guys. Where's your reading comprehension? She never really showed that even immediately after her mentor died. She was more confused than anything. Her response of that it was a long time ago proves Bug Eyes correct. That time does heal all the wounds. All of this will play a crucial role later on, being a huge part of why Hild develops the way she does. Meanwhile, the shaman from the El Nu village performs a ritual. In this drug-induced vision, the shaman sees that many trees are cut down, resulting in many animals losing their homes and being hunted down to extinction. Then the natives would imitate the foreigners, selling fur pelts and eventually being hunted down themselves. He even saw through the future 1,000 years later, from the rise of cities to the creation of nuclear weapons. Determined not to let this future come to pass, the shaman attempts to provoke Thorfinn's side to war and has even allied with other tribes in preparation. But with harvest season coming, Thorfinn, now 27 years old, enjoys the peace of his new home in Vinland, especially as he is now expecting his firstborn child with Gudrid. Then Hild comes forward to Thorfinn and finally forgives him.
It's enough to make a grown man cry.
Yeah, after all the hate and bitterness she expressed openly towards Thorfinn, she has chosen to accept that he has truly changed and become a true warrior. Hearing those words, Thorfinn cries, kneels full, overwhelmed at the peace he gained. You could say this was when his entire journey of being a pacifist was proven to be correct. He could save anyone from hatred without picking up his sword. Hild was a reflection of his former self, the raw hatred encompassing their entire being, how much it consumed them both. But he was able to basically save himself alongside Hild. The moment she forgave him, he could forgive himself. Everyone he killed could also come to forgive him. So in response, Thorfinn erects a cenotaph, a grave marker with the word Frida, the word for peace, in honor of all his victims. But early on in the settlement, Thorfinn also befriended the native El Nu, who had been watching them since their arrival, with one native girl being particularly close to Bug Eyes, as both act as translators for the other party. Close that Bug Eyes even offers to marry her. Wait, how old is she again? 15! And Bug Eyes is 25? Well, I guess in those times, guys, That was a normalcy in the culture. Now at first, the Elnu were wary of the Norse, but Thorfinn made every effort to show he and the Norse meant well. See, part of Thorfinn's plan to make peace involves making products, including new crops the natives have never seen before. To do so, they would have to make farms, and to make farms, they would have to cut down the trees, which in turn drives away the animals the Elnu depend on, and it disrupts their natural livelihoods. Thorfinn would also investigate the mysterious disappearance of the Norsemen he left behind in Markland, one of their stops between Greenland and Vinland. There was no sign of violence or any bodies, but still, this causes the settlers to worry. Back in the village, Thorfinn talks about the need for weapons in Vinland, but as this happens, the Elnu arrive as they attempt to clarify that they have nothing to do with the disappearance of the Markland settlers. Thorfinn shows the Elnu how he respects their customs and intends to build peaceful relations through trade. Seemingly calming tensions down between the Norse and the other tribe, the shaman is not content and attempts to attack Thorfinn with his axe. Since he does not know that Thorfinn was a warrior and could handle himself, Ivar reveals his sword and cuts the shaman's arm off. So Ivar will be the thorn in the side of literally everyone, as he never believes in what Thorfinn preaches, stating that he doesn't fight enough and that killing is necessary, etc, etc. So the second there's even a threat from the Elnu, he loved it. He was preparing to kill immediately. So this was always going to happen. Because of this, the alliance between the Elnu and Norse has been broken off. A lot of Thorfinn's men judge him for being weak and not fighting, but it takes true strength not to take up in arms. We saw this in season 2 when he took 100 punches. Thorfinn says that you never need to fight. We barely know each other. He has no enemies, so why would he pick up a blade and go kill people? All this idiot did is prove Thorfinn right. He genuinely believed, or deluded himself into thinking, that this old man would be able to kill Thorfinn, the man that fought Askeladd, Thorkel, and countless warriors. The only ones who truly understand war are Thorfinn and Hild, and with Hild stating how she wants to kill the two problems, going against what Thorfinn ever wanted because she feared war that much, failing to realize she's falling back into the horrible cycle that Thorfinn was trying to end in Vinland. However, the former Jomsviking captain Vagar, who joined the Vinland crew, was sent to check up on Markland again, and this time he finds a survivor who reveals that Markland was evacuated, and he saw that all the Elnu tribes that lived in the area, they were wiped out. So how did this happen? Well, throughout the voyage, you can see rats appear. Vagar called them good luck. We modern people call them a death flag. They even ended up in some of the Vinland houses, as some chapters show. Yes, basically, the rats transmitted the plague, but the only ones who died were the natives, who lacked the immunity to resist the disease. But we can't forget about England. So what's going on over there? Well, Canute had to burn down a village. That's because everyone came down with pestilence. Two different disease situations, but implied to be linked to the price of exploration. The transmission of diseases to people unequipped to deal with them. By the way, this is the very last scene with Canute, watching the burning ruins of a mighty empire that will crumble in the future when he dies. He shows appreciation for Thorfinn, stating he wonders how he would have handled such a situation, knowing that he has to make incredibly hard decisions and wishes deep down that he could be like him. Realistically, Canute could have never achieved what he has with Thorfinn's methods, which he also admits to Einar shortly after. They debate over Canute's method, the one they experience in the farmland, and we see yet another bit of friction between Einar and Thorfinn. As much as Einar still despised Canute, the emperor who controlled the Vikings. At the same time, he understood the necessity of using violence for the common good to defend a home, which would be Arnheid's village. And yeah, I'm just gonna say at this point of video, you probably got used to my pronunciations at this point. These Nordic names and places are so hard to pronounce. So if you got to this point of the video, make sure to smash the like button and the notification bell. I did try my best. Maybe I butchered a couple of them, and I hope you can forgive me for that. However, in response to their debate, Thorfinn states in every absolute sense that there is no justification for violence, whether it is revenge or the right thing to do. But Hild took another lesson from this conversation, becoming the Knut of Vinland and sorting out the two masterminds responsible for the upcoming war, Ivar and the shaman. One of the Elnu who died was Gitpai, the Elnu chief who advocated for peace. Now, the shaman takes charge, believing that the Norse brought a curse upon the land. The Elnu joined hands with the nearby tribes to drive the Norse out. Now, with tensions rising, the Norse settlers go against Thorfinn's wishes and build up walls, and even begin to arm themselves with what they have. Thinking of a way to end any chance of war quickly, Hild set out on a mission to kill Ivar and the shaman, but Thorfinn stops her before any more blood is spilled. Wanting to de-escalate the situation, Thorfinn together with Einar, Hild and Bug Eyes head to the Elnu village. However, the Elnu, they all gather and gang up on them, blaming the Norse for bringing the plague upon them. So seeing that war rears its ugly head once again in the forefront, Thorfinn makes the decision for the Norse to leave Vinland. A lot of the Elnu realize that this doesn't make any sense. If they were truly evil, then why would they give up this early? Thorfinn's ideals are already shifting the mindsets of many already. While the Elnu debate over the truce, Thorfinn and his group make their escape with the help from their two Elnu friends, Niska and Pulmuk. Whilst Thorfinn was fine with leaving Vinland, this pisses off Einar because after all this time, after losing his old home in England and losing the girl, he now has a place to call home. But then he hears his best friend, his brothers in arms, Thorfinn, choose to run away to escape like he always has. So Einar has had enough of Thorfinn's escapism, telling him that his experiment failed. Now is the time to defend Arnheid's village, even if it means fighting back. Einar heads for the village to warn the others, whilst Thorfinn holds the Elnu attackers back, suffering serious injuries. Now, whilst drifting towards unconsciousness, Thorfinn remembers Thorkild's warning from the last arc, that war will always follow him. He also imagines Einar's anger at losing yet another home. However, Hild, the person who once hated him the most, saves him and tells him to live because the world needs more idealistic fools like him to keep it going. Her willingness to follow Thorfinn and not kill anyone hit the Elnu even more, realizing that they could have killed them whenever they wanted to. Thorfinn really is needed for the new world, that's what they realize. Now, whilst this is all happening, the Elnu attack Arnheid's village just when Gudrid is about to give birth. Cordelia spends the night defending the house, and meanwhile Ivar attacks the natives, but their war chief cuts Ivar's right arm with his own sword. The magic of the sword has now touched the natives, who know nothing of swords or iron. That means the war in Vinland has begun. Just like Thorfinn predicted over and over, bringing this sword to Vinland would be the start of wars and the end of everything they've tried to build. The Norse settlers are outnumbered, but Einar, holding on Arnheid's image, tells the men that he does not care what Thorfinn states and chooses to fight for his home. While the women and children are evacuated, including Gudrid and Kali, the men stay behind to fight back, even actually killing the Elnu that sneak into the village, firing arrows from the safety of their walls. Bug Eyes tries to calm Einar down, but it is far too late to stop the war. Although still grieving from the loss of his right hand, Ivar decides to join the fray, finally entering a war zone for the first time in his life, and dies enjoying what he did and proclaiming that he was a true warrior. So essentially, this dude missed the point until his final breath. Even Thorkel, even every other character is asking what is the meaning of a true warrior. Thorkel regretted even a giant like Thorkel that was almost undefeated for Thor's had it. Then Thorfinn realizes, wait, my dad was right, but this dude either he fumbles the bag until his death thinking, yeah, I was a true warrior, violence is good, because he's an idiot, right? Then Einar, he defends the walls, outnumbered by the Elnu spearmen. Einar has never killed anyone in his entire life, but now in a desperate bid for survival, Einar takes the life of one Elnu man, declaring that he had no other choice. This is stated a lot throughout this arc, by the way. They don't have a choice, but they aren't even trying to see another way. Again, like Thorfinn said in season 2, have you even tried to talk before raising your blades at each other? Fighting should be the last resort, but they've all been corrupted by this violence and war for their own needs and desires. Although he started the war, the shaman tries to tell his own people not to escalate by looting the Norse weapons and goods, especially since there is still a disease going around. However, the warriors, they ignore the shaman. The shaman's apprentice Niska and Pulmuk tell the shaman that the reason his visions keep showing negative futures is because of his negative outlook, and they ask him to help heal Thorfinn. Before waking up, Thorfinn saw the spirits of his victims. He thinks it is time for him to go to hell for his sins, but instead, the spirits tell him that the Frida stone has fallen and he needs to return to bring it back up. They also tell him that he did not fail. After all, he did set sail far across the sea and on a voyage of 1,000 years. He must live. He must fulfill his life's purpose. Thorfinn then awakens and meets the shaman. It has been 6 days since the Elnu began their attack on Arnheid's village. Now, facing the man responsible for this crisis, Thorfinn tells the shaman about his pacifist beliefs, saying the same words he told Knut's Vikings in Kettle's farm. I have no enemies. The shaman is bewildered. He is absolutely shocked because what Thorfinn said is the way of the Great Spirit. The shaman relied so much on his visions, he forgot the first step to everything. He needed to be friends with the Norse first. Simply seeing Thorfinn and his demeanor completely changed the shaman's mindset. Thorfinn then returns to the village to face Gahahorch. I've tried my best. Gahahorch. This dude on your screen right now. Well, he basically returns to the village to face him, and he just happened to kill his chief after he caught the plague. He also sees him with a sword, and the mere sight of this weapon makes him furious because he's technically the one who brought this sword here, and now it's in the hands of a tribe who will be corrupted because of the calling of violence. Gahahorch tells Thorfinn to make the Norse leave, but that he would be the Elnu's hostage in exchange. So even without a translation, Thorfinn already understands the war chief's plan and accepts. He's the same type as Thorkel. They just love war and chaos, the polar opposite of our MC. His life's purpose is to deal with these people, as without them, well, war wouldn't start to begin with. Thorfinn then faces Sturk, who insists on fighting but hides the fact that far too many Norsemen have been killed. Thorfinn clearly displays his intellect here. He deduces that if they really believed they could win, they would have attacked by now. He's not an idiot. He knows exactly how to win wars, but unlike some believe, this isn't the right way. I mean, look at how many people have died, and even the most righteous and innocent can be lured into darkness, which we see perfectly with Einar. Thorfinn then reunites with him, and Thorfinn could clearly tell from his gloomy eyes that Einar had just killed someone. This highlights the trauma that Thorfinn still experiences. He can see who's killed immediately, and in this case, it was his own brother. Even Einar comments about how it's insane that Thorfinn managed to deal with the agony and torment of taking a life, because he's been trying to convince himself that he needed to do it. So burdened by the guilt of his first and only kill, Einar begs for Thorfinn to tell him that he was right in choosing to fight for the village. Thorfinn then lays down the facts and states even if he did agree with Einar, that would not remove the weight of his sin. Einar then finally understands his bro more than ever, realizing that he was right all along. You always have the choice to avoid violence, and this is what makes Thorfinn a true warrior. Einar then accepts the truce that Thorfinn offers, not wanting to see any more lives taken. So the El accept the truce, but before this gets translated, Sturk attacks Gudrid, the man who killed his brother Ivar. But then Einar stops him and pulls his cloak, yet the knife Sturk held leaves a large gash on his neck, causing him to bleed profusely. Gudrid then kills Sturk in retaliation, leading to the remaining Norsemen to prepare, but Viga tells the men to think about Einar's sacrifice. Should they shoot, they will lose more of their own. And so they relent. Because the Norse did nothing, the El also did not attack. Yet even still, it was too late. Get your tissues out, people. Get your tissues out. Einar is dead.
Cut the show. I'm done.
But it wasn't for nothing or in vain. The Norse did not attack after seeing his determination. Through his death, the war finally ended and there was peace. However, in spite of that, the price might be too heavy for some. Thorfinn had lost his friend, a brother who shared the same dream. He would bury Einar together with Arnheid's statue in Vinland, on the spot where Thorfinn erected the Frida stone, whilst the women and children meet up with the surviving men in a nearby island. So having understood the loss of a home would force even a man who hated war like Einar towards violence, Thorfinn walked away, promising to still keep building a land of peace whilst learning to never repeat his mistakes. Karli also makes the same promise to Gudrid, that he would find a way to avoid the disease, to learn the El language and build a world that would understand his father Thorfinn better, which tracks, by the way. I mean, Thorfinn's son in real life went on to do great things, and we can say for certain that Karli would do the same. The final chapter then begins with Thorfinn giving Pulmuk wheat and a hoe to make up for everything that happened a little while ago. There was a war here, but even in the darkest times you can still grow and literally seed new growth. Einar always saw the potential in land, wondering what could be grown. Thorfinn now carries not only the will of his father, but also his best friend and brother. He proceeds to tell Pulmuk till the earth and scatter the seeds in the fall, where he starts to learn. Thorfinn taught him a decent amount. Now it's up to him what happens in the future. Thorfinn then states how he wanted to teach him how to grow it properly, but since it is a strong crop, it can grow with minimal effort. Pulmuk is so thankful that he speaks in Norse, calling Thorfinn his friend. Our MC then repays the gesture, where he proceeds to speak back in Pulmuk's native language, stating that they'll meet again. So despite their differences, they still have tremendous respect for each other, ending it all with a manly handshake. Thorfinn then sails off to his own land before seeing Kaga Kuch. He gives Kaga Huch, or the native way of saying Gaha Huch, and I still know I'm butchering it, but I'm sorry. Basically, Thorfinn sets sail, but before he leaves, he gives that dude one final warning: throw away the sword. If he truly wants to live in peace, he can't rely on violence. That one blade will be enough to corrupt everything, and Thorfinn's not wrong either. The moment the natives laid eyes on those swords, something primal awakened. Violence is a disease, and anyone can be infected. Even Einar, who gave in, and it cost him everything. But what makes Thorfinn different is that he understands that the more you fight, the further you get away from peace. His new creed now matches his father that tried to teach him all the way back in chapter 1. You have no enemies. To everyone else, that sounds insane, just like it did to Thorfinn when his father told him that. But now, through Thorfinn's journey, he's not threatening the dude, he's begging him not to become what he once was. Because now, Thorfinn's entire life is about confronting people obsessed with violence and war. In the past, he ran from them. Thorkel, Garm, he never really changed them, he just escaped. But not anymore. And then Bug Eyes is with Niska, eloping in a little rowboat. They've chosen to disappear and find their own freedom, because if they stay on the island, the native people might kill him. And if they return to Greenland, Niska would be forced to live as a Norse woman. Thorfinn then tries to convince them that it will be fine, but Bug Eyes stands firm that it's too risky. The peace between their people is too fresh to gamble everything. So they sail off, two lovers chasing freedom just like Thor's once did. Bug Eyes is walking that same path, rejecting the world of here for something greater, a blank slate for a future. Eventually, Thorfinn then returns to Greenland, reunited with his wife and children. Keep in mind, after leaving Vinland, he buried his past, his sins, and his failure to protect his friend. But now, he can actually start over, learn, grow, and maybe one day return to the new world to build something better. But the story doesn't end with Thorfinn. We're told about the Saga of the Greenlanders, a real 13th century manuscript describing 6 journeys to North America. Thorfinn's voyage was the 5th and the biggest. He could have gone Viking, sought riches in Europe, but instead, he chased peace at the ends of the earth. Why? Because for Thorfinn, Vinland was more than a destination. It was the ultimate test, the swordless path, the dream his father died for. And even though he tried to live without enemies, the world wouldn't let him. Even still, Vinland Saga teaches us that change is real. And anyone, no matter how far they've fallen, even thinking that they will go to hell, they can still be redeemed and find a new way forward. So this isn't just a story about revenge, it's a manga about how revenge poisons everything. The fights aren't drawn to glorify violence, they're meant to show us how ugly and pointless it truly is. Vinland Saga doesn't tell us Thorfinn is wrong, it tells us to be like him, to face our own cycle of violence and flaws and to break it. The author then had a message with the finale of the manga, that the message was to teach people to mature and be good at the end of the day. Try to be a good person at the best of your abilities. So even though the saga ends, Thorfinn's journey doesn't, because that road towards a world with no enemies will keep going for 1,000 years, over and over again and again, until people understand the message that this manga was trying to portray. So I hope you enjoyed the video. Make sure to let me know what you thought in the comment section below. I tried my best to explain the complete story in a very concise, thoughtful manner, and I'd appreciate if you smash the like button and subscribe.